Chapter 595, Domain. Without waiting for the hermit to answer, Audrey added, "If you believe this is an important piece of information and isn't something to be given for free, then I can provide you with some payment." "No, there's no need to. Anyone familiar with the Fainapotter's Church of Earth Mother will have some understanding of this." Cattleya didn't doubt Miss Justice's sincerity when it came to the principle of equal exchange. She believed that Miss Justice was fully capable of satisfying her price in terms of wealth and resources, but she decided to provide the information for free. Firstly, it raised Miss Justice's impression on her and would build a foundation for any future transactions. Secondly, by providing the information, she could observe the reactions of the members and estimate their standing in their own organizations and factions. "I'm very familiar with the Earth Mother's blessed, Bishop Yutravsky, but I didn't know anything about that. Of course, I truly am a little scared of him. His height and build are just too intimidating. Every time I'm there, I only seek out Emlyn White." Sitting at the end of the long bronze table, Klein thought in a self-deprecating manner. Cattleya didn't pause as she continued, "Vampire is from the moon pathway. The corresponding sequence 9 is Apothecary, sequence 8 is Beast Tamer, sequence 6 is Potions Professor, sequence 5 is Scarlet Scholar, sequence 4 is Shaman King. I'm not sure about the higher sequences." "Ahem." Emlyn White coughed. "Ma'am Hermit, I have to emphasize that it's sanguine, not vampire." "Ha, I won't object it if you call those humans who consume the characteristics of my kinsmen vampires. I would even be very agreeable to it." "So vampire is from the apothecary pathway. So is Shaman King. It's no wonder they revere the primordial moon and not the goddess. Could the scarlet lunar corona, that Ma'am Sharon obtained, be from a dead scarlet scholar or sanguine viscount? Apart from being able to recreate the effects of a full moon and neutralizing the corresponding effects, it can provide terrifying speed, unimaginable recovery speed, and rather powerful darkness-related spells. The negative effects can be neutralized by drinking the fresh blood of the living. Indeed, it does seem to be a result of a sanguine. Among the various jobs of this pathway, there are some that resemble the seer pathway. There's no connection between the sequences, while there are some that have an obvious progression." "How strange." Klein joined the bits of bread crumbs together, feeling somewhat enlightened and puzzled. Alger, Furs, and company were either in thought, listening in relish, or pretending to be disinterested. Everyone had different reactions, but Cattleya was able to figure out that they didn't understand much about vampires prior to this. They are low or mid-ranking members in their organizations or factions. They match the characteristics of being recently pulled into the Tarot Club and at the stage of rapidly advancing. The world didn't react. Either he's very staid, or he long knew of the matter regarding vampires, or both. After repeated observations, I have to admit that the world is the Tarot Club member that needs to have the most attention paid to and be guarded against. Audrey listened with great interest as she thought over it carefully. As though she was attending a family education class, she raised her hands slightly. "Ma'am Hermit, why are the sequences in the moon pathway seemingly unrelated?" The hermit Cattleya looked at Miss Justice and discovered that the dress and accessories she wore were completely different from the last gathering. There was no repeat, but it exuded her luxurious and noble bearing. As her mind went adrift, she seemed to see the portrait of the queen back when she was young. Every piece of clothing she wore was completely different. The same set of clothing was never worn a second time at a formal event. After a moment of silence, Cattleya said, "A pathway sequence doesn't necessarily need to be related or superficially connected. The common trait is that this pathway corresponds to the god's domain. For example, the moon represents spirituality, plants, beauty, parts of life, parts of darkness, and parts of mystery. Therefore, this pathway has apothecary of the plant domain, vampire of the life domain, and beast tamer of the intersection of life and spirituality." "Sanguine," Emlyn White emphasized and lifted his chin slightly. "This should be why us sanguine are very handsome and beautiful." "No, that's not the case. The vampires I've seen are all disgusting and ferocious. Derek retorted weakly in his heart. It can be explained in such a manner. It's quite different from Captain's and Daly's explanations. Different pathways represent the domain possessed by a sequence 0. Or could it be that the two combined is the most accurate answer? I wonder what the domains the sequence 0 of the seer pathway represents. From the symbol behind my chair, it represents strangeness and change. Klein's expression didn't change as his mind whirled. Audrey easily understood Ma'am Hermit's explanation and couldn't help but guess the name of her pathway's sequence 0. It's definitely dragon. There are many species of dragons. Many powers are not contained within this pathway. It's closer to the domain represented by the mind dragon. I wish Mr. Fool can quickly find the card of blasphemy of this corresponding pathway. That Grozel's travels originates from dragons. I wonder if it has anything to do with a mind dragon. At this moment, Emlyn asked as a form of validation, that is to say that to successfully become a sanguine viscount, I similarly have to act as a potions professor, even if I'm a favorite of the moon. My dear Emlyn, I know you are trying to bring attention to the latter half of your sentence. Klein nearly reached out his right hand to pinch his chin. This was also one of the reasons why he had entrusted Miss Magician to check for abnormalities in William Street. He ultimately felt that Emlyn White, a vampire who didn't enjoy going out or socializing, was rather unreliable at present. Another reason was that he knew that he was being controlled by the Sanguine's upper echelons in secret. Getting him to head to William Street made it easy to expose the matter regarding the underground ruins. Yes. Katlia nodded. The exchange continued, and as it came to a close, Audrey seemed to recall something. She turned her body and looked towards the end of the long bronze table. Mr. Fool, the second round of the Civil Servant Unified Examination officially ends today. What's left is the final interview. Her tone was brisk and with clear delightful emotions. It was like an excellent student reporting her results to her parents. From her point of view, the Civil Servant Unified Examination was a suggestion raised by Mr. Fool in passing. She had pushed forward the idea via inconspicuous methods, the first time she had attempted to use her beyonder powers to change reality. Therefore, she had always paid great attention to it, often reporting the situation to the suggester. The second round of the examinations are over. I wonder if Benson can pass and have the opportunity of entering the final interview. Klein leaned back and suddenly felt wistful. He nodded slightly and said with a smiling tone, "Not bad." Audrey, who had been praised by Mr. Fool, became happier. She felt that she was indirectly changing the fates of many people, allowing people who were stuck in the lower and middle classes to have a chance at entering the middle and upper classes. When Katlia heard this exchange, she couldn't help but frown. She felt that this was very different from the style the Tarot Club had previously shown. Could it be that the reforms of the past half a year in the Lone Kingdom were a result of the Tarot Club's turning of the wheels? As a young noble lady, Miss Justice played an important role? If that's the case, I have to reevaluate my views. Although the members aren't of a high sequence and are low-ranking members of their organizations, they're still able to influence the situation of the world to a certain extent. Katlia retracted her gaze and considered whether she wanted to use her different resource channels to figure out the backstory of Lone Kingdom's reforms. After a few minutes of exchanges, the Fool Klein announced the end of the gathering. While Miss Justice and company got up to express their farewells, he severed the connection and leaned back into his seat. He silently watched the endless grayish-white fog around him for a very long while. Backlund. In a coffee shop next to King's Avenue. Melissa was holding a porcelain teaspoon as she gently stirred the black tea which had a lemon in it. From time to time, she would turn her head to look out into the faint fog. Her black veiled hat was sitting beside her. Placed in front of her was a plate of the cheapest toast, but she hadn't taken a single bite. She originally imagined that she would anger the coffee shop's owner for sitting there all this while, preventing him from earning more. But she later discovered that there were many people waiting for the end of the test opposite the road like her. As seconds turned into minutes, the water condensing on the glass windows grew thicker. Melissa couldn't help but extend her hand to clean up a relatively clear spot. Finally, she saw a bunch of people surge out of the test venue. The glass-inlaid wooden door of the coffee shop was pushed open as about 8 men and women entered. Just as Benson took off his rather old top and before he could smooth his rather high hairline with his fingers, he discovered his sister standing as she asked nervously, "How did you do? Were the questions tough today?" It might have been considered difficult for others, but it was a piece of cake for me. Mathematics is my forte. Benson looked around and saw everyone discussing it without noticing him. Hence, he chuckled. After the test ended, I saw quite a number of people with blank sheets. Do they think a low-ranking civil servant will have a mathematics secretary? If that's the case, what's the difference between hiring a curly-haired baboon and them? Melissa heaved a secret sigh of relief and looked to her side before turning her head back. Benson, if you're really confident, you should consider the matter regarding the interview. You need to buy a new decent set of clothes. Let's leave that to tomorrow. We should celebrate today. I've already decided on the restaurant. Benson smiled as he pointed outside. Melissa pursed her lips and looked at her elder brother in an extremely serious manner. I've already bought the meat and vegetables. Benson locked his gaze with his sister for a few seconds before moving it away in submission. All right, let's go home. Above the gray fog, Klein gradually found his train of thought and calmed his emotions. He began considering how to separate the true creator's mental corruption of the all-black eye. Chapter 596, Clue in the majestic palace with stone columns propping it up. Klein sat in a high-back chair as he lightly tapped the corner of the long model table. He first eliminated the method of seeking a sequence 4 unshadowed from the sun pathway. This was because he had almost zero contact with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. It was very difficult for him to find help from anyone. Secondly, he suspected that an unshadowed was unlikely to be capable of cleansing the mental corruption in the all-black eye. After all, the hermit Catlia's suggestion was directed at remnant influences by an ordinary rampager, and not the true creator. Seeking the help of an angel or true God's power isn't realistic either. In theory, I can use the mysterious space above the gray fog to perform a divination on the eternal blazing sun and use his help to shatter the all-black eye and evaporate the mental corruption, but the problem lies with the fact that an experienced him might be able to use this opportunity to invade this place and take over the gray fog. If that happens, it wouldn't be worth it. And when a power that exceeds my level an unknown number of times instantly comes into effect, there's no delay. It targets me, and I'll have no time to redirect it to the all-black eye. I will lack the ability to control the situation. Also, it's not like I can divine it as I wish. I need a medium. I previously used the mutated sun's sacred emblem, which had the eternal blazing sun's divine blood in it, as well as the ear that was corrupted by the true creator. Currently, the mediums I have are Mr. Door and the Hidden Sage. I can use the ravings that Miss Magician hears during the full moon, as well as Knowledge's pursuit of Admiral of Stars to make an attempt. But similarly, the counterattack isn't directed at the all-black eye, and I don't have the means to divert the attack. Mr. Azik has yet to recover. Snake of Fate Will Septon has yet to be born. From the looks of it, I can't find an angel to help me either. Sigh, I still know too few high-ranking figures. Right, there's also something akin to an angel, the evil spirit in the ruins under Backlund that's suspected to be King of Angels Medici. But that fellow is scheming with unknown plots and malicious intent. Unless there's no other method, I will not consider it. Yes, taking the risk isn't worth it at all. If that's the case, I might as well give up on the all-black eye and search for the main ingredients of a Nimblewright master. It's only the dust of ancient wraiths and the core crystal of a 6-winged gargoyle. It's even possible that the former can be found in the underworld. In that case, performing a new search is a viable choice, while finding a mystical item that's similar to the blood vessel thief is another choice. With the gray fog shielding me, I can use its theft abilities to its full extent. I'll definitely be able to separate the true creator's mental corruption from the all-black eye, and I wouldn't be afraid that it would return. The easiest method is to throw the corrupted mystical item far away once the theft is completed. Then, I'll bring the pure all-black eye back to the real world, causing the physical separation of the two items. Well, how am I to find a similar mystical item? Mr. Hanged Man didn't say anything after seeing the methods, which implies that he doesn't know either. However, I can ask at the next tarot gathering. Ma'am Hermit, Miss Magician, Miss Justice, Little Sun, and Emlyn White all have their corresponding information and resource channels. I can try searching for it myself this week. I'll start with Vice Admiral Iceberg. Her third mate, Flowery Bowtie Jodson, has beyonder powers that can steal. Perhaps he might know where there might be similar mystical items. Klein's thought process gradually cleared up as he formulated an initial plan. He first performed a divination before rapidly returning to the real world. He got out of the decadent state of laying slump in the reclining chair drinking beverages and reading newspapers as he quickly set up a ritual. It was still 3 candles, but the difference was the symbol he drew. It was the sacred emblem of the god of knowledge and wisdom, an omniscient eye on an open book. The ritual's silver dagger also switched to a brass knife. In mysticism, the blue star corresponded to the god of knowledge and wisdom, and the metal that belonged to the blue star's domain was mercury and brass. Klein had long considered the problem of contacting Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards. Therefore, he prepared a set of soulfall ritual materials. After a series of processes, he burned the corresponding herb powder, and he dripped the extract and essence from lavender and mint. Amidst the faint, clear, and mysterious fragrance, Klein took a step back and used ancient Hermes to recite an incantation. I pray for the power of knowledge, I pray for the power of rationality, I pray for the God of wisdom's loving grace, I pray that you allow me to communicate with the spirit of Edwina Edwards, the teacher who pursues knowledge, the researcher of spirit world creatures, Vice Admiral Iceberg of the Seas, who hails from Lenberg. Klein's voice reverberated as the altar instantly turned gloomy and cold. Be it the brass knife or the metallic bottles, all of them floated up. It succeeded. The golden dream is still within 500 nautical miles. Klein first felt a sense of delight before he saw the flames of the 3 candles lengthen. They were tainted with a pale white with a hint of dark green. He knew that the soulfall ritual was essentially to free his body and allow the target's astral projection to possess him to establish an effective communication channel. He would be lacking in the necessary protection, making it easy to be attacked by the target of the soulfall ritual. Therefore, he had divined ahead of time to determine the danger from this matter. Besides, after meeting and conversing with her, he believed that Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina wasn't a person with malicious intent. He temporarily found her trustworthy. At this moment, the wind within the wall of spirituality produced mournful sounds. Klein only felt an ice-cold power descend upon him from the void in an attempt to enter his body. Then, he was surprised to discover that it wasn't like he expected. He had the necessary strength to resist and control himself instead of being possessed by her. What's happening? Just as he had the thought, he began to see a faint, formless gray fog around him. This was a trait he possessed after advancing to faceless. The power of the gray fog was able to slightly leak into reality. Amidst his racing mind, Klein didn't hesitate to wave his arm. He pointed to a coat hanging on a coat rack, throwing the ice-cold power onto it. The black tweed coat on the coat rack strangely floated up as the arms raised up, looking somewhat clumsy. It was as though an invisible person was wearing his coat. The black coat floated 2 meters forward before coming to a pause. The 2 sleeves raised up and formed in times. What does that mean? Klein was taken aback before he realized what Vice Admiral Iceberg meant. Without a mouth, I can't speak. Without hands, I can't write. This is awkward. Klein thought for a moment and directly said, I need a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. Ma'am, might I know if you have one? If you don't, can you ask your third mate for me? Flowery Bowtie Jodson. The corresponding answer can be written in a letter. Summon my messenger to send it over. The black coat's sleeves spread out and motioned with a lowering gesture. Following that, it lost its soul and fell to the ground, no longer appearing as straight as before. That means, yes. Klein sighed silently and quickly ended the ritual. He hung up the black coat and used a brush and handkerchief to clean it. Then, he wrote a letter and asked Mr. Azek a similar question. He summoned the messenger by blowing the copper whistle. After the letter was taken away, Klein attempted the third method with great drive. He took out the paper crane from his wallet and carefully spread it out. He wrote with a pencil on it, "Might I ask where I can get a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others?" Putting down the pencil, Klein restored the paper crane according to its lines. He was quite pleased with his improvement at handicraft. In the evening, after Klein browsed through the prayers of his believers, he returned to the real world and went to the washroom to enjoy a rather comfortable hot bath. This allowed him to quickly fall asleep after entering his bed. This continued until he suddenly sensed an external force invading his dream. It was the same desolate plains with the towering pitch-black steeple. With familiarity, Klein passed through the doors and walls until he entered deep inside the tower. There was still a deck of tarot cards scattered here. They surrounded a central protrusion as though they were making a declaration. However, as a seer, Klein could only interpret it as chaotic and contradictory. On the protruded area, the text had already changed. The silver words formed 3 sentences. The first line wrote, "I'm only a child that has yet to been born." Klein's expression froze as though he was hearing an infant cry, "Please, I beg you. Don't make things difficult for me." Such communication is very tiring. The second line was equally succinct. "The clue lies in you." The third line was, "Don't ask me what the clue is because I have no idea either." That is to say that Snake of Fate Will Acceptin can foresee a clue on me, but he is unable to foresee what it is exactly. That feels like a charlatan's divination. No, I can't say so. I can't include myself in such criticism. Klein remembered the information and exited the dream before returning back to sleep until daybreak. After breakfast, he began recalling the items and matters he had experienced before to seek out the so-called clue. At this moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he quickly activated his spirit vision. The skeleton messenger remained huge, but unlike the last time, its head didn't pass through the ceiling. This was because it had spewed up from the floor, so half its head was in the level below. In such a situation, it looked at Klein at his eye level and placed the return letter on his palm. Seeing the messenger crumble like a falling waterfall, Klein was taken back. He muttered, feeling both angry and amused, "So you do know some manners. You're getting more considerate after all. You've changed greatly after knowing that you wouldn't be transferred to me." Klein rapidly retracted his gaze and opened the letter to read Mr. Azek's reply. "Stealing the beyonder powers of others is from the Marauder pathway. In the 4th epoch, it belonged to the Amon family, the Zoroast family, and the Jacob family. They seldom appeared after the War of the 4 Emperors. Rumor has it that some of their members have formed an alliance and call themselves Hermits of Fate. I can't remember any further. You can try attacking from the angle of the descendants of these 3 families. Amon. So a blasphemer refers to this pathway. The Jacob family was one of the 5 angel families of the Tudor dynasty. It was equal to Abraham, Ammon, Antigonus, and Tamara. As for the Zoroast family, it's from the Solomon Empire. Hermits of Fate. Fate, Hermit. The clue lies in me. Klein suddenly sat up and recalled an item. It was the mysterious badge from Lenivis. The symbols on it were none other than that of fate and concealment. Chapter 597, Klein's plan. Lenivis is likely a Sequence 8 swindler. This happens to be from the Marauder pathway. It's not incomprehensible or unacceptable that he would have the admission ticket to the corresponding gathering. On the contrary, it's very logical. Purchasing a mystical item, which can steal the beyonder powers of others, at a gathering with the Hermits of Fate is definitely much easier than other circles. From the looks of it, this is the so-called clue Will Septon mentioned. Klein sat by the edge of the bed and suddenly brightened up. He hurriedly set up a ritual to summon himself and went above the gray fog to bring back the eyeball-sized badge to the real world. On the front of the badge was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes: "You can join if you have this item." Klein was just about to inject his spirituality to activate the badge and send out the information to synchronize it with the latest gathering time and location when he suddenly turned hesitant. How careless am I? I actually forgot to divine if doing so will be dangerous. If that gathering has Lenivus's demigod senior and he uses it to lock onto me, that will be troublesome. It's just like how Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was able to quickly find a demoness of unaging to help her. I must take precautions. A person should be rash when the time calls for it, and be a coward when necessary. Klein smacked his forehead and cautiously returned to the mysterious space above the gray fog where he used spirit dowsing to perform a divination. After receiving a revelation that there wasn't any danger, he breathed a sigh of relief and left the gray fog. He then sat in the reclining chair in his inn room. With the injection of his spirituality, the badge emitted a blurry luster and quickly condensed into an inconspicuous light beam, shooting out into the air. Before long, the same light beam returned and dispersed, transforming into a palm-sized piece of illusory goatskin parchment. On it was written the words in ancient Fasak, June 6, 1350, 9 p.m., at the Tussock River's estuary. That's another 4 more months. With this much time, it wouldn't be a problem for me to find the Nimblewright Master's main ingredient all over again. The only obstacle is a lack of money, but that's not too difficult. I now have a wealth of £6,945. I should have more than enough after selling another 1 or 2 beyonder characteristics. Besides, there are so many moving bounties at sea. No. I can't be so conceited. I have to eliminate the 4 kings and the 7 admirals. What kind of clue is this? Klein leaned forward, arched his back, and began thinking hard. As he thought about the gathering of the Hermits of Fate, he suddenly thought of someone, Leonard Mitchell. My dear poet had participated in the Hermits of Fate gathering in Bobber Valley. Regardless of his goal, whether it's for official work or private matters, there's a possibility of him obtaining a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. I can borrow it from him or buy it through him. This is the real clue. Klein felt energized as he quickly came up with a rough plan. First step. Place the radio transceiver above the gray fog to accumulate its aura. Second step, use the radio transceiver to contact Erodes a few days later. Third step, ask it where I can, with relative ease, obtain mystical items that can steal the beyonder powers of others. If the answer is very clear, the fourth step will follow what the information says, easily completing my goal. If the answer is vague or fraught with danger, the fourth step can be to ask my dear poet's present location. The fifth step is to get Emlyn White to take this badge to find my dear poet to see if he has any corresponding items and if it's possible to do a transaction. I won't appear in person, for I might end up being recognized. That will similarly make it very troublesome. As for Emlyn, he's presently considered someone from the Church of Earth Mother, considered a ghost of the Church of Earth Mother. To get him to initiate first contact, even if he were reported by my dear poet or ends up captured on the spot, he wouldn't be framed or put up for torture. With the plan on what to do and how to proceed, Klein immediately felt refreshed. In his good mood, he decided to head out to eat a Byam delicacy, roasted fish. Above the blue sea, the Golden Dream, which was sparkling thanks to the setting sun's golden rays, was silently cruising forward. Receiving his captain's permission, Danitz apprehensively walked into her room with his head up as people stared at him with envy. Bookshelves filled the room and on top of them were different books. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina stood in front of a desk as she held a black fountain pen in her hand. She quickly wrote the following. I do not have similar items. Same for Jodson. He says he will help you look out for it, but that will require you to be sufficiently lucky. Edwina raised her head and turned her clear, aqueous blue eyes to look at Danitz. You, hold the ritual to summon Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. At that moment, Danitz was wondering if he would receive any special treatment from his captain, but when he heard that, he pointed at himself in astonishment. Me? Yes. Edwina folded the letter, straightened her body, and nodded. This can help you familiarize yourself with similar rituals. In the future, I'll be testing you on this. Alright, Danitz hid his disappointment as he tried his best to recall the procedure as he slowly set up the ritual that only needed one candle. Finally, under Edwina's watch, he took out a shiny lone gold coin and placed it on the altar. After taking the letter, Danitz ran through the subsequent ritual in his mind twice before he dared to do it. He took a step back and said in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. Whoosh! The wind howled in the wall of spirituality, sending Danitz's yellow hair flailing upwards. The flame rapidly burgeoned to the size of a human's head. It was as pale as the letter in Danitz's hand. Soon, Danitz saw long blonde hair, bloodshot eyes, and a gorgeous head appear. Hiss! Gehrman Sparrow's messenger is very unique. How can a spirit world creature look like a human, and it's so beautiful at that? She's just slightly inferior to Captain, Danitz suddenly choked because he discovered that the head didn't have a neck underneath. Furthermore, it was held up by a pigtail with a hand. He looked in a daze as one head after another appeared. He saw the headless figure dressed in a complicated dress appear before him. She's indeed a creature from the spirit world. He felt ashamed for having those thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Danitz hurriedly handed over the letter and saw one of the beautiful heads open its mouth to bite at it with pearly white teeth. At this moment, Rionette Tynker's other head bit on the gold coin on the altar. However, she didn't immediately leave. The four bloodshot eyes on other two heads darted towards Edwina Edwards, who was outside the wall of spirituality. She sized her up a few times. Edwina felt herself being observed, and it made it impossible to contain the horror that ensued. Rionette Tynker retracted her gaze as her body turned illusory, fusing into the white candlelight. The flame lit up again as the colors spread outwards. Everything had restored to normal. Just as Danitz removed the wall of spirituality, he heard his captain say in a deep voice, "That's not an ordinary creature from the spirit world. Not an ordinary creature from the spirit world?" Danitz was stunned. He knew that his captain's profession was a researcher of spirit world creatures. If she said it wasn't ordinary, it definitely wasn't one. It was far more extraordinary than ordinary. Gehrman Sparrow really is a man with many secrets. Danitz reflected. Backlund, Cherwood Burrow. Furs mustered every fiber in her body before she triumphed over the laziness brought from the fireplace. She switched to a thick dark blue cotton dress, wrapped a light gray scarf around her, and wore a warm lady's hat. In the not-too-cold temperatures, aside from the cold that seeped into her bones thanks to the prevailing fog, she took a carriage to William Street. She took in the cold air and told herself that this was a common excursion for an author to gather material outside. There was no need for her to be nervous or appear abnormal. Taking a few steps forward, Furs entered a coffee shop and sat by the window. As she drank the thick, warm liquid, she observed the pedestrians and the houses across the road. There's nothing abnormal. There's no fighting or theft at all. This is a place where the rich live, so the security is much better than East Borough. Ha, I can still see someone from Faysac. He's really tall and muscular, like a bear. He also has companions. Ha, are those people from Intis? They really wear exaggerated clothes, it's like they're acting in a play. Backlund is indeed the capital of capitals. I can meet many foreigners here. Furs gradually forgot her goal and opened up a notebook to record down material for her novel. After she finished her coffee, she circled the street and left after finding nothing peculiar. She planned to come again on Thursday. After taking Edwina's reply letter from Rionette Tynker's hands, Klein watched as the messenger vanished, confirming that she hadn't asked for an additional gold coin. From the looks of it, using a gold coin as a ritual material works. He smiled, feeling pleased with himself as he opened the letter. With a fruitless answer, he planned on going out to walk the streets to find a chance to engage in true acting so as to conclude the principles. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. It was Captain Eland. Klein silently opened the door and said, "I was just about to look for you." Eland chuckled and said, "There's no need. As long as you register a place with your identity, I'll be able to know where you're staying. The Governor General's office and the military have quite good control on the inns after all." Klein nodded without a word. Eland turned his body halfway and pointed at the corridor. "I'll bring you to see someone. The White Agate is about to return to Pritz Harbor. If you need help or have any information to provide, you can find him. We're often generous when it comes to payment." This was what Klein had previously mentioned to him before. "All right." Klein reached out to the coat rack. After wearing his coat, Eland led him straight to the Amiris Leaf Bar and to a corner inside. In the basement of the Amiris Leaf Bar, Wormtongue Mither King looked at Strongman Ozeal opposite him and asked, "Have you gathered the recent intel about Blazing Danitz?" "Yes," Ozeal said with a smile. "Last week, Blue Eyes Meath saw Blazing Danitz with an unknown adventurer." Chapter 598, Windfall, Indiana. A corner of the Amiris Leaf Bar. Eland found a man wearing a coffee-colored jacket, patted him on the shoulder, and laughed. "Why aren't you drinking Lanty Proof?" The man was in his 30s, having a rather common face. It was obvious that he had lone blood running through his veins. He had brown hair and eyes, with a somewhat high nose bridge. His tipsy appearance instantly vanished as his eyes turned sharp. He swept a glance at Eland and Klein before his eyes turned turbid again. He said, sounding completely intoxicated, "I've already drunk. I'm drinking Zarhar to lessen the effects of the alcohol." Zarhar was a locally produced malt beer. It was cheap and tasted quite good. Eland chuckled and pointed at Klein. "Gehrman Sparrow." Then, he introduced the man to Klein, "Oz Kent. You can call him Kent. Chat amongst yourselves. I'll have to return to make preparations. I'll be setting off early, tomorrow morning." He waved his hand and left without any hesitation. Klein pulled over a nearby chair and sat down. He didn't get any alcohol as he expressionlessly looked at Oz Kent. The staring made Kent feel extremely uncomfortable as he downed a mouthful of Zarhar and said, "Find me if there's anything in the future. You'll be paid as long as you provide any intel of value, or if you help us do certain things." He wasn't worried that the drunkards around them would hear their conversation, as many gangs and pirate crews would say the same thing. The words used to rope in informants were usually the same. "All right." Klein had the strong urge to ask if he could be reimbursed for dressing up as Helene to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment despite it being paid by Danitz. However, it was just a thought. Oz Kent chuckled while appearing completely drunk. "I heard Eland mention some things about you, but I have to remind you that one shouldn't be too crazy out at sea. You need to take note and try your best not to provoke the pirates. What I mean is to not fight them head-on. Privately providing us information would be fine. We will keep it a secret for you." This time, he had clearly suppressed his voice. Seeing no response from Gehrman Sparrow, he added, "Pirates wouldn't bother with any chivalrous code, nor will they abide by the kingdom's laws and rules." Burp. If you have a family at different port cities or some island colony, they'd definitely be capable of attacking your family. Family. Klein fell silent for a second before calmly saying, "I do not have a family." Oz Kent was nearly at a loss for words. All he could do was say, "They will also attack your friends." Then, he heard Gehrman Sparrow reply in an unperturbed tone, I do not have friends. Oz Kent instantly choked up. He subconsciously drank a mouthful of Zarhar beer to calm himself. After coughing twice, he said in a deep voice, "They will also ambush you. They will also bribe people to learn about your schedule and intercept your ship. At sea, a single person's strength is often so inconsequential." Klein said rather calmly, "I wouldn't reject them from giving me money. That's basic courtesy." Giving money? Oz Kent was clearly taken aback as he found Gehrman Sparrow's words incomprehensible. A few seconds later, he realized that the man was treating pirates as mobile bounties. He drank mouthful after mouthful of beer, momentarily at a loss for words. In the basement of the Amiris Leaf Bar. An unknown adventurer. Wormtongue Mither King's mind stirred as he sat straight up. Strongman Ozil nodded. According to Blue Eyes Meath, that adventurer is new. He likely hasn't been to the archipelago for long, but Meath felt that he was considerably dangerous. Considerably dangerous? Could he be the person who killed Steel Mavedi and company with blazing Danitz? Could it be the person who disguised himself as Helene to attack Captain? Mither immediately made certain connections as he asked with a deep voice, "Do you have his photograph or a portrait?" Ozil beckoned to a subordinate and received a piece of white paper. "We used a ritual to get Blue Eyes Meath to draw the unknown adventurer's appearance. As you know, it's different having a firm footing in Biam's underground world than being a successful pirate. I need supporting members. Sigh, to hire them, I spent quite a bit of money." Mither could read between the lines as he chuckled. "As long as you get to the bottom of this matter, Captain wouldn't be stingy with her reward." He took the portrait, spread it out, and discovered a cold-looking man with black hair and brown eyes. His face was slightly thin, and he had a cut face. He wore a black double-breasted frock coat and a half-top hat. Never seen him before. It's impossible to confirm if he's the person who disguised himself as Helene. Mither raised his head and said, "Find out his identity and whereabouts." "I've already instructed my men to do it," Strongman Ozil said with a deep laugh. The two fell silent at the same time as they drank their Southville red wine. A few minutes later, a bar bouncer entered and broke the silence. He glanced at Wormtongue Mither, leaned in towards his boss's ear, and whispered. Ozil's expression instantly turned odd as an unconcealed smile appeared. He put down the wine glass and said after pausing, "That unknown adventurer has been found." "Where is he?" Mither asked. Ozil pointed upstairs. "At this very bar." Mither looked up at the ceiling and remained silent for a few seconds. "I'll go up to verify." He believed that having had some interaction with the disguised Helene, he had a general understanding of the man's abilities. He believed that no matter how good the man was at disguising himself, he would definitely feel a sense of familiarity, therefore, he decided to confirm it himself. According to his usual habits, he wouldn't have taken such initiative and would instead perform an investigation from the outskirts. Only with enough confidence would he get himself involved. But this time, he wasn't too convinced of Ozil's subordinate. If it was really the person who disguised himself as Helene, he would immediately change his appearance and identity and vanish once he noticed something was amiss. Besides, Mither knew that he was presently being punished by his captain. He had to quickly perform a deed of merit in order to return to the Black Death. Sigh, regardless if I was lacking in ability or not being careful enough, the outcome cannot be changed. I was fooled by that disguise and brought her onto the Black Death, nearly killing Captain. If it were Kalangos, he wouldn't have spared me. He has always been very greedy. He had long thirsted for my beyonder powers. Captain didn't believe that I had been in cahoots with the assassin simply because Kalangos could also change his appearance with creeping hunger. She didn't summon people to surround and kill me. She only sent me to Biam to investigate this matter. She's already being forgiving enough. Compared to Kalangos, she is truly a captain worthy of being loyal to. I have to quickly provide some meritorious service and find an excuse to contact her, so as to live up to her treatment towards me. As Mither King got up and walked out, he couldn't help but have these thoughts churn through his mind. Although he was a pirate who had killed countless and had plundered countless ships, he had a soft spot in his heart. Besides, he didn't notice that he was being constantly mesmerized by Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy via prolonged interactions with her. His fondness for her had seeped deep into his bones. Even if Ailment Maiden didn't have helpers, he wouldn't have resisted, kneeling down and kissing her toes at her behest. Of course, this didn't affect his fantasies of doing countless deeds with Tracy. If he had the chance, he believed he would take the initiative to do so even if he didn't get her permission. As a pirate, he had done such things plenty of times. When he went upstairs, Mither King followed the guidance of Oziel's subordinates and circled halfway around the bar's walls. From afar, he saw the unknown adventurer sitting in the corner. Identical to the portrait, but I don't feel any familiarity. Is it because his disguise is sufficiently good, or is he someone else, for example, Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina? She can mimic the beyonder powers of those she had seen before. It's not impossible for her to change appearance like Kalengo's. Mither's gaze paused for 2 seconds before he cautiously retracted it. But at this moment, Klein's spiritual intuition as a seer told him that someone was observing him. Without concealing anything, Klein immediately turned to look back. He saw a man with short eyebrows, deep eye sockets, and bronze eyes. Wormtongue Mither King. Third mate of Vice Admiral Ailment's flagship, Black Death. Klein instantly recognized the person observing him. Instantly, 2 thoughts flashed in his mind. One of them was, £5,400 bounty. The other was, why is he observing me? He managed to find me by investigating Danitz. The military contact person, Oz Kent, discovered Gehrman Sparrow's abnormality as he traced his gaze. However, due to his angle, he was blocked by a few drunkards. At this point in time, Klein already instinctively came up with a solution. It was to pretend that he didn't recognize Mither King, retract his gaze, and get a cup of alcohol to drink. He could then secretly observe where he went, and then use his powers as a faceless to infiltrate ere Mither hid himself before silently hunting him. As this thought flashed past his mind, Klein suddenly discovered a problem. That's me being myself. But I'm now Gehrman Sparrow, a seemingly calm but crazy adventurer. With this thought, he suddenly turned around, drew his revolver, and aimed at Wormtongue Mither King inside the rowdy bar. Bang! A gunshot rang through the bar as many customers reflexively crouched down while hugging their heads. All of them were extremely experienced. Many drunkards slumped to the ground, with more than 10 people throwing themselves to the side or rolling on the ground to dodge. These series of actions were well practiced. And Mither King was one of them. However, Klein didn't really pull the trigger, as he was afraid of injuring the innocent bystanders by mistake. There were many customers in between him and Mither. The gunshot stemmed from his powers of illusion creation. At that moment, everything before him opened up as people crouched down. Hence, having aimed at Mither, who had thrown himself sideways to the ground, he pulled the trigger this time. Bang! Chapter 599, Dragon Might Bang. The brass bullet traversed past half the bar, flying straight for Wormtongue Mither King's body. But just as it was about to hit him, Mither's brown eyes suddenly turned dark. The bullet made a turn, and its trajectory was thrown upwards slightly as it accurately hit a glass cup filled with golden beer. Amidst a loud noise, the glass instantly shattered, splashing beer everywhere. At the same time, Mither grabbed a cup from a customer, extended his arm, and threw it at Klein. What's the point of that? Klein only dodged slightly to allow the glass cup to miss him, shattering onto the wall. At this moment, Wormtongue Mither immediately lunged forward and rolled, heading for the entrance to the basement. He attempted entry in order to get help or escape via a secret path. He had initially confirmed that the unknown and crazy adventurer was the assassin, who had disguised as Helene and boarded the Black Death, targeting Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. Furthermore, his series of actions, which had nearly succeeded, told him that in a one-on-one situation, he wasn't a match for him. This was a powerhouse at the pirate admiral level. Tap! 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 Klein quickly chased after Wormtongue Mither. He was fast and agile. Despite being inside the chaotic bar, he didn't step onto anyone. Seeing that the bouncers in the basement were coming with revolvers in hand and how Mither King was about to enter the basement with bouncers in the bar approaching, Klein didn't hesitate. He suddenly clenched his left hand. The black glove was instantly covered with dense dark golden scales. His dark brown irises turned pale and became vertical. Right on the heels of that, an invisible wave surged outwards with him as its epicenter. In the areas where the wave passed, the customers who were holding their heads down turned limp or trembled. The military contact, Oz Kent, also clearly lost his sense of reason, as though he had encountered the most terrifying thing in the world. All he wanted to do was to escape. The bouncers who had approached were no different. Extreme horror gripped their hearts as they ran around aimlessly, making the situation turn even more chaotic. Clang! 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 The bouncers in the basement threw away their weapons, either running to a corner and shrinking into a ball, or they were trembling on the spot, their crotches rapidly turning moist. Wormtongue Mither felt as though he was struck by lightning. In his fear, he began running in circles at the entrance. This was a psychiatrist's awe, also known as Dragon's Might or Mass Chaos. This was Klein's only crowd control beyond her power. At this moment, Klein's rapidly approaching figure didn't stop. In a few steps, he had arrived beside Mither. In that instant, a scene suddenly surfaced in his mind. Mither, who looked to be lost in extreme horror, suddenly raised his head and swung his right fist over, aiming straight for Klein's head. Without any thought, Klein fully trusted his clown's intuition for danger. He immediately bent down and turned his body sideways. Almost at the same time, Wormtongue Mither suddenly raised his head. His brown eyes were dark and clear, without any sense of muddle-headedness. At some moment in time, he had shaken off the effects of Dragon's Might. This was something that exceeded Klein's expectations. Bang! Mither's muscles bulged as he bent his back and threw a punch that resembled a cannonball. However, he didn't hit his expected target and instead hit the wall of the entrance. Creak! The spot where his fist connected threw up pulverized bricks. Quickly, a huge hole that seemed to be covered in a spider web appeared. The entire bar seemed to shake. The power of the punch was far stronger than a revolver's bullet. But at this moment, Klein had already flashed behind him. His body straightened up again as his gloves seemed to be covered in a layer of gold. His brown eyes lit up with two flashes of lightning as they shot out like bullets. Interrogator's psychic piercing. Ah! Mither King let out a shrill cry, but he didn't fall to the ground. He rolled as he grimaced in pain, holding his arms to protect his head. He soon magically recovered from the pain of psychic piercing, but he felt ice-cold metal at his forehead. He saw the cold and thin adventurer pull the trigger. At such a close distance, even though psychic piercing's effects could only be maintained for a second, it was enough for Klein to raise his right arm and place the revolver's barrel at Wormtongue Mither King's head. Bang! Mither King's pleas shrank back from his half-agape mouth and into his throat as a picture seemingly formed of blood and white material appeared on the wall behind him. It was melancholic, fresh, and messy. The luster in his eyes vanished as Mither collapsed backward, leaning against the wall before sliding to the ground. At noon on the 1st of February 1350, Wormtongue Mither was hunted. Klein glanced around at the chaotic bar and closed the door to the basement. He chained the door with the existing chains and forcibly made a knot. He bent down and dragged Mither King down a few steps, but he didn't directly enter. As he was wary of enemies who might suddenly charge out from inside, he opened up his palm and aimed it at Wormtongue Mither's corpse from above. He had no qualms about grazing the Black Death's third mate. He believed that he was definitely someone with heinous crimes to his name. Firstly, he was once a subordinate of Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, and the deceased pirate admiral had once massacred an entire ship. He was a rather cold-blooded person. It was simply obvious from what the Red Glove nightmare inside Creeping Hunger had encountered. Secondly, Mither was working for Vice Admiral Ailment, which was equivalent to working for the Demonist sect. It was unknown how many cases of human trafficking he had been involved in. Creeping Hunger restored its thin human skin appearance as his palm cracked open, producing 2 bloodshot eyes. In an instant, a biting cold wind stirred in the entrance's passageway to the basement. It constantly spun around Wormtongue Mither's corpse, slowly outlining a blurry figure with short eyebrows and deep eye sockets. Black but undull points of light rapidly surged out of the corpse, combining with Mither's spirit body. All of them were injected into Creeping Hunger, where an empty finger was waiting for it, forming a connection with the surroundings to a certain degree. Creeping Hunger first went from a black color with a sinister and noble vibe before returning to its original state as it suffused its desire for flesh and blood. Klein silently diverted his senses to it for a few seconds and was pleasantly surprised that the powers he received were rather useful. Although there were only 2, they were much better than the previous 3 he had obtained from the zombie sequence. At this point, he learned that the mid-sequence Beyonder was a Sequence 6 Baron of Corruption from the Lawyer pathway. One of them came from a Baron of Corruption and the other came from the Sequence 7 Briber. The former was distortion. By distorting the target's words, actions, and intent, he could formulate a certain order that provided himself with an advantage, so as to achieve the goal of restraining and influencing his opponent. The latter was bribe, which was one of the various powers of a briber. More accurately, it would be bribe, weaken. The premise behind using this power was to give the target a certain item, then, for a certain amount of time, greatly weaken the target's attacks, defense, and control over him. Give the target a certain item? His act of throwing a cup of alcohol was considered a bribe? As expected of the Black Emperor pathway. It finds loopholes in order while it appears domineering. It's no wonder my dragon's might and psychic piercing powers weren't as effective as I imagined them to be on Mither. Even my bullet's strength was reduced. I thought that shot would have blown his entire head up. Klein came to a realization. At the same time, he understood why he had involuntarily flown towards the Black Emperor where King of the 5 Seas, Nast, was. It was because Nast had distorted his intent to proceed forward, making it impossible for him to stop. Not bad at all. Klein lowered his head to steal a glance at Wormtongue Mither's corpse before he went down to the basement. He was trying to find some food for Creeping Hunger. It was unknown whether it had to do with him throwing Creeping Hunger above the grey fog repeatedly, but Creeping Hunger wasn't as crazy anymore. It seemed to be able to bear with its hunger, therefore, Klein wasn't in a hurry. He slowly proceeded forward so as to be careful of encountering any accidents. Before long, he saw Strongman Ozil leading his subordinates over. There were Beyonders and gunmen, and their numbers were sizable. Klein's expression remained stoic as his black glove was covered in dark golden scales once again. His irises turned light in color as they suddenly turned vertical. Invisible waves instantly surged forward. Psychiatrist's Dragon's Might. Chapter 600, Clearing the Place with Dragon's Might surging out, Strongman Ozil and his subordinates quaked on the spot, as though a gigantic hammer had struck them. Suddenly, some of them ran in every direction, escaping aimlessly. Some kept going in circles on the spot, while others stood on the spot, trembling uncontrollably. There were all kinds of different reactions. Unlike previously when he was afraid that Wormtongue Mither would recover, making it necessary to make every second count, Klein had plenty of time to observe his surroundings at that moment. He instantly grasped the situation. Different reactions stem from their mental fortitude and resilience. The weakest and most ordinary ones were the ones who ran wildly. Those with relatively stronger mental fortitude among the ordinary people would run about aimlessly. For Beyonders, who had their psyche enhanced, as well as ordinary people who had strong mental fortitudes, they would circle around on the spot, trying to escape but stopping themselves as well. The strong beyonders with strong mental fortitude would stand on the spot as they tremble or go around in circles on the spot. Those who suffer from incontinence as a result of fear belong to the escaping and avoiding group. Klein swept his gaze and was about to raise his gun to shoot, making the enemies who could threaten him lose the ability to do combat. At this moment, he discovered that a man who had been trembling on the spot had recovered the clarity in his eyes. He was about to escape the influence of awe. As for the others, they were also showing symptoms of recovering. Considering how he didn't have the ability to finish all of them off in such a short period of time, and how a gunshot would jolt a number of them back to their senses, as well as how different beyonders, when combining their different powers together, could cause him harm, Klein changed his mind and made the glove on his left palm be tainted with a sinister, reflective blackness. His eyes turned dark as he forcefully distorted the intents of the people who were waking up. The trembling man pounced forward suddenly. He could no longer resist his thoughts of fleeing. He ran straight for the secret exit, leaving his employer, strongman Oziel, as a constantly shrinking back. Klein rapidly switched between psychiatrist and baron of corruption, using dragon's might followed by distortion as he repeated this sequence. Soon, and he chased all the mentally Oziel's strong or resilient bouncers to the basement. Although there was no way of comparing creeping hunger to a genuine shepherd, switching between different souls required a certain amount of time to cool down. Klein grasped this rhythm very well. He easily completed his goal while there were still some remnant effects from Dragon's Might. However, he also discovered a problem. For certain targets, if they were repeatedly exposed to Dragon's Might and Awe within a short period of time, the effects would weaken with repeated use. Of course, most of Strongman Oziel's subordinates were already slumped on the ground after repeatedly being hit by Dragon's Might. They were pissing and defecating themselves, emitting a stench. Dragon's Might and distortion are quite a good combination. If Mither hadn't tried to counterattack, he could have escaped with bribe, weaken and distortion, and I might not have necessarily been able to catch up to him and finish him off. Yes, that counterattack of his was very potent. There weren't any signs prior to it. If it wasn't due to a seer and clown's reliance on their spirituality and intuition, I might not have been able to use paper figurine substitutes in time, much less talk about dodging the strike. This reminds me that even though creeping hunger provides the combat strength of a sequence 5, I shouldn't belittle other sequence a success. A careless mistake might have me killed. Amidst his thoughts, Klein made the glove turn as though it was gilded. His eyes suddenly lit up with 2 bolts of lightning. Strongman Oziel immediately cried out in pain as he couldn't bear it anymore. He crashed to the ground like a toppling mountain peak. He held his head as he struggled in pain like a catfish that had just been caught. Unfortunately, I don't have Beyonder powers that can perform an area of effect attack. Otherwise, I'd be able to keep the other Beyonders back. I remember that there's a lightning storm in the Sea King's domain. However, such charms are of too high a level. It exceeds the realm of my knowledge. Klein swept his gaze across all the goons before unhurriedly walking to the basement. This place was originally a market, but with everyone fleeing, it was empty. Dressed in his double-breasted frock coat, Klein pulled a chair out from behind a stall. He placed it before Oziel and leisurely sat down. He leaned forward as he observed the boss of the Amiris Leaf Bar without a word. After Oziel tumbled around for a while, he finally recovered from the pain that nearly made him lose control. However, he still suffered from a splitting headache. He was just about to stand up when he saw a pair of pale-colored eyes that reflected pale gold light. He saw a glove covered in dark golden scales. In that instant, cold sweat was still dripping from his forehead. He felt that one maelstrom after another was appearing in his eyes, sucking in all his attention. Klein calmly asked, "Were you once a pirate?" "Yes." Oziel realized that he had the strong intention of answering the man. This was a psychological cue. Klein asked again without a change in tone, "What deeds have you done in the past that violate the kingdom's laws?" Oziel didn't hide anything from him. He simply explained what he had done as a pirate and as the boss of the Amiris Leaf Bar. It included his plundering of liners, raping female passengers, and killing the innocent. This included striking down competitors and kidnapping their family members, setting ambushes to sink an entire family to the bottom of the ocean. Klein listened to all of this in silence, and the corners of his mouth curled up slowly. He clapped his left palm against his right hand and said, "What a competent pirate and passable gang boss." Amidst his praise, he extended his left hand as a ferocious mouth opened up on the thin human skin. Shrill screams resounded in the basement, but it stopped after a few seconds. All that was left were echoes. Klein sat in his seat, watching silently as the bright points of light slowly gathered in front of him. Around him, all the goons who were suffering from incontinence instinctively distanced themselves from him. As they crawled, they left stains on the ground. Moments later, Klein slowly stood up. He bent down to pick up a pure spherical light that was the size of a baby's fist, as well as the wallet inside Ozil's clothes. After stealing a glance at the thickness of the wad of cash, he put away the two items and holstered his revolver. He took off his half-top hat and bowed at the trembling goons in the corner. Klein checked the underground area after he was done with everything. To his regret, he didn't discover any items like a safe. All he could do was return via the passageway, pick up Wormtongue Mither King's corpse, and walk to the entrance. He paused for 2 seconds as the scene outside was naturally outlined in his mind. He discovered that the bouncers, who he imagined would attempt to open the door to provide help, had already disappeared. The dragon's might from just now made them realize that it's a battle between Beyonders, so they retreated. As expected of a region where pirates are everywhere. Some ordinary people still have a chance of understanding about Beyonders. It seems such matters happen often here. Some fugitive suddenly gets arrested by the mandated punishers. Klein undid the metal chains and reached for Mither King's pocket in passing and took his cash. He held back the urge to count his earnings as he burned a paper figurine and threw it outside before opening the door to the entrance. He then walked out with Mither's corpse. At this moment, most of the customers in the bar were gone. There were only about 8 people hiding in different spots to await the outcome. Klein surveyed the area without any expression as he saw gazes frantically retract. The only person who dared to look at him head-on was Oz Kent. He was frowning as he watched Gehrman Sparrow carry a corpse over slowly. Bang! The corpse flew in front of him, smashing over a table. Oz Kent focused his gaze as his pupils instantly contracted. Wormtongue Mither King. Vice Admiral Ailment's third mate, Mither King. He looked up in shock, stealing another glance at Gehrman Sparrow. Klein revealed a faint smile. "Remember my bounty." With that said, he took his half-top hat, bowed slightly as a form of bidding farewell, and turned to leave through the Amiris Leaf Bar's main door. Byam Harbor. On the White Agate. Eland watched as the door to his captain's cabin was slammed open. He asked in surprise, "Kent, what happened?" Oz Kent questioned him with a warped expression. "Eland, what kind of monster did you introduce me to?" "Gehrman Sparrow." Eland returned with a question, feeling somewhat uncertain. Oz Kent nodded. "He killed Wormtongue and Strongman without batting an eye, right inside Amiris Leaf Bar, right in front of me. It didn't even take him 5 minutes. He felt like he was going crazy." "Mither King?" Eland asked, but he sounded like he was repeating the name to himself. Then, he revealed a rueful smile. "From the looks of it, we have to report to the higher-ups." He didn't mention Blazing Danitz nor Steel Mavadi's death. "All right." Oz Kent was waiting for him to say that. At 3 in the afternoon, inside a garden building near the Governor General's office. Eland and Oz Kent were sitting in an elegantly decorated living room as they awaited the reply from an important figure. After an unknown amount of time, a young man with neatly combed back blonde hair walked down the staircase and said to the two, "The General says that since he temporarily doesn't show any animosity, we should honor the agreement and continue our cooperation from before. However, we must be careful. Send a telegram back to Backlund and secretly investigate his true identity and intentions here at sea. Also, spread the news that he killed Mither King. To the pirates. Yes, Mr. Awan. After receiving clear instructions, Eland and Oz Kent immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Inside the inn, Klein did a divination and counted his cash, confirming that he had received £327 9 solely 5 pence, and a Beyonder characteristic from a Sequence 8 pugilist from the Warrior Pathway. This is also an item worth £600 to £700. Furthermore, there's Mither's bounty. Even if I deduct the labor fees, there will still be several £1,000s. Ha! Oz Kent might not dare to take his cut. This is quite a good harvest. It's like a windfall. Klein thought in comfort before holding a ritual, sending creeping hunger up to the grey fog. To be frank, he felt that Dragon's Might, Frenzy, and Psychological Cue were 3 rather useful Beyonder powers that he couldn't bear to part with. However, since he had already promised Miss Justice, he ultimately chose to abide by his promise. Chapter 601, Scaring Oneself Above the Grey Fog. Klein leaned back into his high-back chair and held creeping hunger. He remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he released the psychiatrist's soul according to the specific steps. A tall figure quickly appeared by the side of the bronze table. It was a woman whose face looked somewhat blurry. Her pain and distorted feelings was apparent. Klein looked at her and asked her as though he was chatting with her, "Do you still remember who you are?" In the mysterious space, he could directly channel her spirit. The psychiatrist's enmity reduced substantially as she smiled bitterly. "Of course I remember. I was a member of a secret organization and was planning to meet a friend in Toscarter Island, but I ended up encountering pirates on the way. Although I used my powers to resolve the disaster, the pirates who escaped informed Kalengos of the corresponding situation. In order to obtain my powers, he deliberately changed course and intercepted our ship. You can probably imagine what happened after that. Thanks to his meticulousness, I was killed instantly, unlike the other female passengers who encountered things that were worse than death." Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding slightly. "Do you know of the ancient book known as Grosel's Travels?" He believed that since Grosel's travels came from the dragons, it was possible that the psychiatrist had heard of its name or the corresponding information. The female psychiatrist thought over it carefully before shaking her head. "I'm sorry. I've never heard that name before." Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "Since you're about to dissipate and gain eternal peace, do you have any last wishes?" The psychiatrist lowered her head and chuckled. "I wish to be revived." "All right. I know that this wish cannot be satisfied. Everything else isn't necessary. I've been dead for years. My family and friends have probably already received news of my death. Informing them again of my death will only dig up the pain of those memories. Let's leave it at that. Thank you." That should be it. Her figure quickly dissipated and vanished, leaving behind a huge golden iris that could expose the thoughts of everyone's hearts. This was the Beyonder characteristic of a psychiatrist. Klein sighed and began pondering over the details of what the psychiatrist had said. She was visiting a friend at Toscarter Island alone without any family. Toscarter Island is located at the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, and it's south of the Gargas archipelago. That's the easternmost colony of the Lone Kingdom, while the Gargas archipelago belongs to the Faysac Empire. What kind of friend would be there? What kind of friend is worth visiting after taking such a long trip? Although she only said that she's from a secret organization, the chances are that it's the psychology alchemists. Was she out on a mission? Klein respected the deceased and didn't wish to dig out her secrets, so he didn't probe deeper. Without any clues, he quickly stopped thinking about such matters and considered something else. After hunting down Wormtongue Mither King, regardless of the reason, I have to leave Byam for the time being. I've really done quite a bit in the City of Generosity during this period of time. Yes, I'll participate in about 3 Beyonder gatherings and confirm whether there are the main ingredients of Nimblewright Master before leaving. Klein rapidly made a decision and conjured a scene of the world praying. Covering it with the gray fog, he threw the scene to the crimson star representing Miss Justice. Audrey was standing on the balcony on the 3rd floor looking at the nearby village. The rooftops were mainly brick red in color as they showed depictions, abstract pictures, or real pictures of dragons. Suddenly, the familiar endless void surfaced in front of her eyes. Amidst the gray fog, a blurry figure was standing high above, praying to the god above. "Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform Miss Justice that she can make preparations for the transaction." "I can make preparations for the transaction." He has obtained the beyonder characteristic of a psychiatrist. But he still didn't have one yesterday. The world's efficiency shocked Audrey as she nearly forgot to thank Mr. Fool. Thankfully, she was no longer the green and naive lady from before. She had been exposed to several major matters and rapidly calmed her mind as she sincerely thanked him. She passed on the message for Mr. World to wait another 2 to 3 days as she was preparing to pay off the money she owed to Mr. Fool's Blessed. Although she had sufficient money, she had to maintain a minimum balance, otherwise it was easy for others to notice something amiss. After the illusory gray fog dissipated, Audrey silently looked down at Susie, who was admiring the garden on the 1st floor, before pacing around and secretly clicking her tongue. Mr. World is really terrifying. Evening, in the Seaweed Bar. Having just squandered all his money at the casino, Blue Eyes Meath sat before a bar counter and ordered a cup of Lanty Proof. He was just about to raise the cup when he suddenly heard the bartender whisper to him with a suppressed voice, "Wormtongue Mither is dead." "What? Who did it?" Blue Eyes Meath was first alarmed before he asked excitedly, "Someone is challenging Vice Admiral Ailment?" "An adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow. He wasn't known at all before." "Who knew that he finished off Mither?" The bartender didn't hide his shock and alarm. "He also killed Oziel, the real boss of Amiris Leaf Bar, Strongman Oziel." Blue Eyes Meath was just about to sigh when he frowned suddenly. Back when Oziel's men came to ask him about Blazing Danitz, he had mentioned that the bosun of the Golden Dream was seen mixing in with an unknown adventurer. He had used a ritual to provide the corresponding portrait. Oziel is dead. Mither King is dead. It's done by an unknown adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow. Blue Eyes Meath suddenly trembled as a scene that left a deep impression on him surfaced in his mind. The young man that looked like a gentleman was standing by the entrance of the bar. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin and cut face. His eyes coldly observed the customers as though he was seeking out his prey. Blue Eyes Meath shuddered and couldn't be bothered with drinking his alcohol. He got up immediately and took wide strides out of the bar. Terrifying. That guy is too terrifying. Even Wormtongue died at his hands. He's definitely a powerhouse at the admiral level. He will definitely seek me out and finish me off. No, I can't stay in Byam any longer. I have to return to the ship and be far away from here. Blue Eyes Meath ran to the Red Theater and forcibly pulled his companions with him. They headed for the woods and circled around to the private harbor ran by the Resistance. Opposite across the Red Theater, the herb store in the alley remained open. The chubby apothecary, Darkwill, was sitting behind the counter, wearing a calm expression, but internally, he was deeply worried. He had already contacted the Life School of Thought members he knew via various methods and sought their help. However, he had no idea who they were or when they would come. He could only bear with his fear and anxiety as he continued running the store, pretending as though nothing had happened. "Darkwill, you're extremely uneasy." The chubby owl flew over from an unknown location and landed on the counter. "There's no need for you to remind me. I know my state of mind very well." Darkwill waved his hands impatiently. He could still remember the times when he was still under his teacher's tutelage. He was often warned to be careful of the official Beyonder organizations and be careful of the true Sanguine. In regards to this, Roy King raised several examples, such as being imprisoned underground forever, with no sunlight or woman to be seen, being made into experimental subjects where their bodies would be used to test the dangers of particular sealed artifacts. There, they would experience all kinds of experiments, and after mutating, they were monsters who acted on instinct. It was also possible to be sucked and eaten by the sanguine and made into puppets. These examples had deeply imprinted themselves in his mind. It made his already lacking courage vanish instantly. After leaving his teacher's side, he often stayed in a city for a short period of time, immediately leaving once there was a risk of exposure. Darkwill tried hard to keep his horror under control, placing his attention on the problem of rescuing his teacher. Old man has been captured for some time. Why is he still imprisoned in the Governor General's office? With the military's abilities, they should be able to gather any information they wish to know. Be it an outright execution, the gathering of materials, or being used as an experimental subject, they would definitely move Old Man. Could it be that Old Man used some techniques to hide his secret, or they wished to make him into a spy? Sigh, just agree to it. Darkwill scratched his head as his thoughts wandered aimlessly. Gradually, he recalled the last letter he received from his teacher, Roy King. Old Man often likes to give hints in things that seem to be normal and ordinary matters. Could that letter contain similar information? That letter didn't say a thing. It just said to meet him near the Red Theater and flaunted his gambling techniques. Pooey. He clearly relies on luck. He even wanted me to go to Enmat Street's Mabel's Sundry Store and buy a die to make preparations to be educated. I thought I would buy it only after we met, so I haven't been there all this time. Perhaps there's a secret there. Darkwill was like a drowning man who seemed to clutch at a straw. Many of Byam's streets were named after Lone Kingdom cities. Darkwill used a few minutes to muster his courage, brought the owl with him, and closed the door to his shop before walking out of the alley. While waiting for the rental carriage, he bought a copy of the news report from a paperboy as he flipped through the international and domestic news, as well as news about the archipelago. Suddenly, he saw a familiar face. It was the adventurer who had informed him of Roy King's location. In the afternoon, Gehrman Sparrow killed Wormtongue Mithur King, who's worth a bounty reaching £5,400. I actually entrusted a mission to such a powerful adventurer. Darkwill clicked his tongue. He soon threw the matter to the back of his mind and got onto the carriage and headed straight for Enmat Street and found Mabel's Sundry Store. The owner of the shop was a genial old lady who said after sizing him up, "The die you want costs £1. This is a robbery." Darkwill roared angrily in his head, but this only made him more certain that there might be clues hidden in the die. After paying, he received a tiny ring box and opened the lid. He saw a milky white six-sided die which had 4 red dots pointing up. Although he was puzzled with how ordinary the die looked and how it was stuffed tightly into the ring box with no remnant space, Darkwill still acted cautiously by not studying it on the spot. He placed it into his pocket and walked to another side of the street. When he came to a secluded spot, he couldn't help but give it a glance, unable to find any problems with it. At this moment, a carriage flew by and gave him a fright. His wrist trembled as he dropped the die on the ground. The die continued rolling and ultimately came to a stop, a single red dot pointing up. Darkwill cursed the carriage driver and widened his stride to pick it up. Just as he took this step, his body suddenly staggered, and he collapsed to the ground loudly despite the lack of any obstacles. All he saw were stars. His mind went blank for a moment as he lay there, the milky white die right in front of his eyes. Chapter 602, Becoming Famous. Darkwill sprawled on the ground, momentarily forgetting to stand up. His mind remained blank. Ever since he had matured, he had never encountered a scenario of tripping himself. After consuming the potions, his body had experienced enhancements to a certain degree, making it even more impossible. Now, for some baffling reason, he had fallen down in an inexplicable manner. Did I step on something? Darkwill suddenly snapped to his senses as he struck down with his palm and rolled to his feet. He pretended as though the one who had just fallen wasn't him. He looked left and right without finding anything odd on the ground. Filled with puzzlement, he took a few difficult steps forward to pick up the milky white die. At this moment, a patrolling constable seemed to have sensed the disturbance as he jogged over with baton in hand while holding his other hand down on his revolver. Upon seeing this scene, Darkwill suddenly felt worried, feeling suspicious that he had fallen for a trap. "They caught old man but haven't come for me all this time. It's because they were secretly observing me and waiting for me to find some clues. Now, I've gotten my hands on this strange die, they've started taking action. The official Beyonders are here to catch me." Darkwill instinctively turned around and ran, but he had suffered a rather heavy fall, causing him to feel pain in his knees. He was momentarily only able to walk. Seeing the patrolling constable approach him, and with him not being able to run, a scene of an underground prison instantly surfaced in Darkwill's mind. In an environment with only an everlasting candlelight, locked with Beyonders who would heave intensely like monsters. "What happened?" The patrolling constable pressed down on his revolver as he kept his distance and asked cautiously. Darkwill suddenly felt an irrepressible fear. As his wrist trembled, the milky white die he had just picked up fell to the ground again as it rolled a few times. This time, 6 red dots pointed up. Faced with the constable's scrutiny, Darkwill replied with a trembling voice, "I just stepped onto a damn banana skin and fell." The moment he said that, he felt his heart skip a beat. This was because there wasn't any banana skins on the ground. Damn it. I was too nervous. I should have said that I tripped myself. Darkwill thought in frustration. He decided to summon the owl perched on the roof opposite him, preparing to make a last stand. The patrolling constable gave him a glance and chuckled. "Make sure to watch where you place your feet when walking. I was imagining that you had been robbed." He released his palm on his revolver, raised his baton, and walked away. In a daze, Darkwill looked at the constable's back that was opening up a gap from him. He wasn't sure how the constable had so easily believed his excuse that was filled with mistakes. He retracted his gaze and looked at the milky white die which was sitting on the ground in silence. He slowly frowned. "I'm not pure Loanese. The constables here don't need to suck up to me. Could it be all thanks to this? Be it my strange fall or my weird way of convincing the constable, it was all because of this? Is this that important sealed artifact which teacher was taking care of?" Darkwill quickly made certain connections as he carefully proceeded forward. He picked up the die again and stuffed it into the extremely tiny ring box. In the box, the die had no room to roll. Signaling to his owl, Darkwill picked up the news report copy, stopped a rental carriage, and hobbled up. His destination, Red Theater. The carriage smoothly proceeded forward. Because dusk was setting in, the street lamps which were relatively far away didn't illuminate the area much. He wasn't in a rush to study the ring box or the die inside. He patiently waited until he returned home. After entering the herb store and heading up to the residential area on the second floor, he lit the wall lamp and chased the silly bird out of his room. He sat in front of his desk and repeatedly checked on the ring box and milky white die. Finally, he took out a folded piece of paper about the length of a finger segment from the bottom of the ring box. Darkwill inhaled silently as he quickly spread open the piece of paper and discovered that there were 3 paragraphs written in ancient Fasak. "If I didn't appear 3 days after the appointed time, then I must have been betrayed and have been arrested. Therefore, do not seek out help from the other members of the school of thought. This is because I'm unable to determine who did it. This will bring you great danger. There is only one thing that you need to do. Bring the die to Oravi Island and hand it to the bellman, Carnot, in the port city. My teacher, Ricardo, is hidden there. The subsequent matters will be handled by him. Don't worry that I'll divulge this secret. Once I finish writing this letter, all relevant memories would completely disappear. I wouldn't even remember having an apprentice like you until I'm rescued. Remember, try your best not to use the die. It has living characteristics. The more you use it, the easier it is for it to awaken. It will roll itself when you aren't watching it, even without any space. When it's at 1, please trust me when I say that you'll suffer from worse than a direct death. This is because almost everything you do will end in failure, including your bed activities. Indeed, this die is very dangerous. Darkwill subconsciously sighed and immediately realized the dumb act he had done out of goodwill. In order to rescue his teacher, Roy King, he overcame his cowardliness and remained in Byam, as well as sent out a cry for help to the Life School of Thought members. And according to the information, this meant that he might very well have been targeted by the person who betrayed Roy King. Why didn't you say so earlier? No, why didn't I head out to buy the die earlier? Darkwill raised his hands and yanked at his hair. He didn't dare stay any longer. He decided to leave his residence and buy a scalp ticket at night. He would head for Oravi Island early the next morning. That was an island that was on the route between the Rorstad Archipelago and Toscarter Island. My charms, my revolver, my bullets. Darkwill quickly counted the items that could provide him with safety, feeling concern over his lack of combat strength. He quickly thought of an idea as he paced around and mumbled, I need to hire a bodyguard. A bodyguard, who should I hire? How much money must I spend? Amidst his thoughts, Darkwill's gaze swept across the news report copy which he had just brought back. Suddenly, he thought of an excellent bodyguard, Gehrman Sparrow. A powerful adventurer who could hunt a pirate worth 5,400 pounds. If he's willing to accept the mission, I should be able to successfully arrive at Oravi Island if the counselor doesn't take action. How can I find him? Right. I should paste notices in the bars where adventurers frequently appear. Darkwill nodded indiscernibly as he stuffed the items back into his packed suitcase. With this plump owl, he left the herb store once again, his heart feeling the pinch. In the seas beyond the Rorstad Archipelago, in a small port belonging to Lone, the Black Death was docked there without any scruples. It was being surrounded by 3 ships. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, who had just taken a hot bath, wore a loose man's shirt, and she finished the final treatment for her mostly recovered wound. To a demoness, scars weren't a thing. At this moment, the blonde female attendant knocked on the door and entered the captain's cabin after receiving permission. When she saw Tracy, her cheeks flushed red as she moved her gaze away. Captain, a telegram was sent from Byam to the port over here. Mither, third mate has been killed. Tracy stopped her actions as her expression sank. She asked hesitantly, do you know who did it? She had sent Wormtongue Mither to Byam to investigate the assassination attempt on her, firstly as a form of punishment for his dereliction of duty, and secondly, to spread the news that she was heavily injured so as to lure others who harbored malicious intent into attacking her. She never expected Mither to be able to make any breakthroughs or developments in a short period of time. After the demigod addressed as Death Consul by the Demoness of Unaging visited her, she had deliberately concealed this matter and didn't quickly inform Mither. She allowed the punishment to continue as she felt that it was naturally for the best if his investigations turned fruitful. Even if there was nothing, she wouldn't be too disappointed either. She never thought about the possibility of Mither being placed at risk, as it was a part of the punishment. But to her surprise, Mither had been killed so quickly. The blonde female attendant handed over the telegram and said, it was done by an adventurer named Gehrman Sparrow. It can be confirmed that he had used a beyonder power similar to Dragon's Might. Gehrman Sparrow. Dragon's Might. Ha. Kalangos also knew Dragon's Might. He likely grazed a psychiatrist or hypnotist with creeping hunger. Tracy sneered after receiving the telegram as she spoke to herself. She was quite certain that Gehrman Sparrow was the enemy who had disguised himself as Helene to attack her. Furthermore, he had been using the faceless powers which Kalangos had grazed. Creeping hunger is with him, and he has an ancient demigod, whom Mother addressed as Death Consul, backing him. Does this mean that Kalangos was really killed by that Death Consul? Tracy muttered silently as she waved her hand to send the blonde attendant out. After the door to the captain's cabin closed, she chuckled to herself. If I were to divulge this information, the organization that ordered Kalangos to assassinate Duke Negan would definitely be very interested. For a brief moment of time, she really had the urge to do so, but her rationality stopped her. This was because it meant that she would directly offend the Death Consul. And with the single chance of him being recognized as the murderer, she would immediately be suspected of divulging the information. When the time comes, unless I hide back at Mother's side, I'll be under the shadow of death at any moment. I'm not afraid of other saints. They will have to find me before they can attack me. Besides, there will definitely be some indication of that, and a significant amount of time is needed. I will have sufficient chances to escape danger, but the Death Consul can travel using the spirit world. As long as he determines my location, he will quickly appear beside me. Tracy bit her lip as she thought in depression. She gave up her previous thoughts and decided to take note of Gehrman Sparrow's whereabouts. She wouldn't spare him once a good opportunity arose. At this moment, Klein was still living in the Tina Inn, waiting for his bounty to be delivered to him. Chapter 603, Conditions 10 p.m., Swordfish Bar. After waiting an entire afternoon and having not received his bounty, Klein deliberately went out. He went to Oz Kent and received the news that the process had been kick-started. However, he would only receive the money tomorrow morning. He disguised himself and participated in a private exchange among the adventurers in the Swordfish Bar, but he didn't find the main ingredients of the Nimblewright Master Potion or any mystical items. After restoring his appearance, Klein pressed down on his hat and attempted to squeeze through the crowd. He left the bar, which was in its rowdiest and noisiest time of the day. At this point, gazes swept past his face as most of them were momentarily taken aback before they clearly froze for 2 seconds, as though they had recognized something. Suddenly, they retracted their gaze and retreated far away from Klein like the receding tide. They had already learned of Gehrman Sparrow's appearance and strength in the papers and rumors. More details had gradually spread in areas where adventurers, pirates, and gang members gathered. Many people gained a basic understanding of the present situation and knew that Gehrman Sparrow had taken the crazy action of instantly drawing his revolver once he discovered Wormtongue Myth or King. Therefore, everyone knew better and chose to stay away from the dangerous man. The merchant, Ralph, was drinking in front of the bar when he suddenly sensed the disturbance. He instinctively half-turned his body around and looked over. He soon saw a quiet gentleman with a thin face and cut features, and the corresponding portrait which appeared on news report surfaced in his mind, Gehrman Sparrow who hunted Wormtongue. Following that, Ralph recalled his conversation with Resistance leader, Kalat, in the evening. He confirmed that the crazy adventurer before him wasn't averse to see God, and he had even witnessed the private trade between the Resistance and Vice Admiral Iceberg. Perhaps I can develop him into being a believer of Sea God. Even if he has no interest in the archipelago in the future, he might be able to provide certain help in certain matters. Ralph clasped his hands and held them to his mouth as though he was blowing at a sea conch. This was one of the gestures used to pray to sea god Calvetua. Then, he suddenly got up and walked to Gehrman Sparrow with a beer in hand. At this moment, Klein also noticed Ralph's approach and recognized him. That was a devout believer who was willing to offer up a third of his 20,000 gold pound wealth to see God. That was the former pirate and the present merchant who he had convinced to set up a children's charity foundation. Based on the news regarding the charity foundation and his frequent pious praying, he understood Ralph in all aspects. Therefore, he was very puzzled as to why the man would attempt to approach Gehrman Sparrow. He has a job to entrust to me. Things that the Resistance isn't able to do for some reason or another. Klein looked at Ralph as he slowed down his pace. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow? Ralph raised the cup of beer in his hand. Klein nodded and maintained his persona by saying, I don't know you. Ha, it's always so simple to get to know each other among adventurers. Perhaps a cup of beer is all it takes. Ralph pointed at the bar counter. Are you interested in a drink? All right, Klein was deeply puzzled as he answered simply. They sat in the corner of the bar as he ordered a cup of Southville beer. As he drank, he looked at Ralph without saying a word. Being stared at silently by a powerhouse at the level of a pirate admiral wasn't a good experience. Ralph drank a mouthful of beer to hide his high-strung nerves and laughed. I've heard about you. Before what you did today, I know that you're a true gentleman that shows no discrimination towards the natives of the colonial lands. Different things to say flashed through Klein's mind as he finally decided on a few sentences that corresponded to his persona. Get to the meat of the issue. Ralph nearly choked as he cleared his throat. Do I have the honor to introduce you to our God, the savior of the archipelago, the blessed of the sea, Calvetua? As you know, the sea is so vast. The storms are that terrifying. It's impossible to guarantee that one can defeat the various difficulties at sea and live on, even for the four kings. We need a God that can respond to you and hold authority over the sea and storm. Introducing me to myself and then getting me to believe in myself. Klein resisted the urge to twitch the corners of his face as he turned to say, I'm more interested in whether you have any mystical items, the kind that has powerful offensive strength. Ralph revealed an honest smile. We don't have any. However, as long as you piously believe in sea God, there might be a day when you would be bestowed with one. I don't have one. Don't make promises for me. Klein instantly found it amusing and laughable. He felt that he couldn't carry on the conversation. Hence, he downed his half-filled cup of Southville beer and said, I'll consider it. He was about to leave when the bartender suddenly came over and squeezed a smile. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow, someone entrusted you with a mission. What is it? Klein glanced at Ralph. Knowing his place, the latter left his seat with his beer. He was already very pleased with today's outcome. This was because he never had the intention of developing the crazy adventurer into a believer of sea God in one try. His goal was only to let him know of the possibility and to think about the pros and cons of doing so. After the silence in the corner of the bar resumed, the bar counter immediately said with a smile, he says he's an apothecary, you know. He has a mission to entrust to you. If you're interested, you can wait here for him. We will contact him with the previously established method. An apothecary I know. The chubby Darkwill. The Darkwill who rears a plump owl. What kind of mission would he have for me? Rescue his teacher, Roy King. That isn't something I will do. The risk is just too high. As his thoughts raced, Klein decided to first figure out the details of the mission. Okay. At nearly 11 p.m., Klein met the apprehensive Darkwill in billiard room 3 of the Swordfish Bar. He had already changed into a rather eye-catching witch doctor robe and was dressed as a native. He was in a taraba shirt, pantaloons, and a brown jacket. As for this round-faced owl, it was perched silently on his right shoulder, observing the adventurer with his penetrating eyes. It's very similar to the feeling of how Miss Justice observes the other members of the Tarot Club. This owl might really be a beyonder creature. A spectator? Klein made a judgment as he said in a deep tone without a change in expression, what mission is it that you have? It's this. The chubby apothecary kept his left hand in his pocket and clenched the ring box tightly. I'll be making a trip to another island. It will probably take 3 days. Due to certain developments, I might encounter danger. Of course, it might not happen as well. In short, I need a bodyguard, and I think you're the best choice. The way you put it sounds like I'm actually not that impressive, it's just that you know a few people. You aren't rescuing your teacher and had chosen to leave Byam to seek out helpers. Or he has already been saved and the danger comes from the military's pursuit. Klein pondered over the truth behind the matter as he calmly asked, how great would the danger be? Darkwill's lips trembled as he said, I can't be sure. If the danger exceeds what you can handle, you can directly hand me over to the other party. This will be a promise we make now. It will not spoil your reputation. If I didn't know that you just have a nasty mouth, then I would have imagined this as a form of goading. Klein thought and said, what kind of payment can you provide? Darkwill originally wished to directly give the answer he had considered long ago, but he felt hesitant for a moment. This was because the matter was indeed very dangerous. Without enough chips, he couldn't move Gairman Sparrow into agreeing. He was afraid of the appearance of the counselor, and that before the matter reached a level of despair, his bodyguard would give up resisting. This was also the reason why he had to hire a powerhouse. Klein glanced at him and coldly said, "You can first consider it for a moment. I'll use the washroom. Tell me your answer when I'm back." With that said, he turned around and walked to the door. Pulling the handle, he stepped outside. The way he responded made him seem experienced, having the coolness and coldness of an adventurer and bounty hunter, but in fact, he wasn't really giving the chubby apothecary time to think. He was only finding an opportunity to head to the washroom to divine the matter above the gray fog. This was key to whether he accepted the mission. Once he left the billiard room and arrived in front of a washroom. He got in line before finally getting an empty cubicle. When he entered, he frowned as the dirty environment and disgusting stench left him grossed out. He nearly turned his head and left. He held back his disgust as he pulled the flush lever in contempt. As he sighed at the terrible environment for his divination, he took 4 tiny steps counterclockwise and began the ritual. Inside the billiard room, Darkwill agilely went to close the door after he saw Gairman Sparrow's back completely disappear. He asked the owl on his shoulder, "Will he betray me?" "No," the owl mumbled. "Also, when asking me questions, be polite. Call me Mr. Harry." The fat on Darkwill's face trembled. "Mr. Harry, what kind of payment do you think he will accept?" "I can't see through him. He's good at concealing his emotions," the owl said frankly. "Darn Mr. Harry." "No, darn silly bird." Darkwill cursed inwardly as he paced around and considered the chips he could offer. After a while, Klein returned to billiard room 3 and asked, "Have you thought it through?" He had already divined above the gray fog that the mission's danger was acceptable, and he happened to plan on leaving Byam for the time being. £800 for 3 days, as well as our friendship. "I'm referring to the friendship of my teacher and his friends," Darkwill said without confidence. Klein remained silent for a few seconds and said, £1,000 for 3 days. "In addition, your organization needs to help me obtain a mystical item with powerful offensive abilities. I will pay in cash based on a reasonable price." £1,000. How could I have that much? Darkwill hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'll pay an advance of £300. The rest will be paid by the person I'm looking for when we arrive at my destination." He planned on getting his teacher's teacher to pay the rest. Klein nodded slightly and said, "Deal." Darkwill immediately heaved a sigh of relief before puffing his face and said with a smile, "Can I believe that the protection is in immediate effect?" Chapter 604, A Different Enemy. Upon hearing the chubby apothecary's question, Klein smiled inwardly as he wore a stoic expression. "From the moment you make the first payment." Darkwill didn't hesitate to take out a huge wad of cash as he counted it while his heart pained for the money. "Here's £300. You can carry out your promise." Klein received the notes and nodded. "That wouldn't be an issue." Darkwill immediately felt relieved, as though he was a drowning person who had finally caught onto a float. Half an hour later, in the Tina Inn, Darkwill watched in a daze as the powerful adventurer, Gairman Sparrow, said to the reception counter, "Switch us to a luxurious suite." With that said, Klein took 2 steps backward as though giving his spot to the chubby apothecary. Darkwill gulped his saliva and asked hesitantly, "I'm paying?" During the mission, all expenses are borne by the employer. "This is the rule adventurers follow," Klein said without a change in expression. "I'd be a dumbass if I believed you. Am I to help you pay if you call for a few red theater prostitutes?" Darkwill thought as he squeezed out a smile. "We can use an ordinary room. This will make the protection job easier. Then, you stay by yourself." Klein acted as Gairman Sparrow without any effort. Darkwill laughed and walked to the counter and said without expression, "A luxurious suite." When Darkwill finally checked in and entered the smaller bedroom, he opened the window and left an opening for the owl, Mr. Harry. He took out the ring box in his pocket and checked the situation of the strange die. After confirming that the die was the same as before, with 4 points facing up, Darkwill gradually heaved a sigh of relief. Backlund. Inside an ordinary house. Zangwill woke up from his slumber, and the first thing he did was check on his body. This was something he had to repeat every day. This was because he had no idea what kind of story 0-08 would compose after he slept, bringing about unknown accidents. After confirming that he wasn't injured, Zangwill wore a pair of bright leather boots and stood up. Without any surprises, he saw 0-08 silently sitting on his desk as though it was an ordinary quill. However, it had been locked in a metal box that was covered with symbols and magic labels. Zangwill walked over with a heavy heart and grabbed 0-08. He flipped open the notebook beside him and discovered that there was another page of text. Zangwill couldn't recall what he had done last night, but he acutely sensed some problems. He looked into the mirror and found his reflection somewhat unfamiliar, as though his body had given birth to another Zangwill. He looked down and saw there were obvious abnormalities under his fingernails, but he couldn't recall what he had done the previous night no matter how hard he tried. After seeing this description, Zangwill instinctively looked at the full-body mirror in the room. He saw that he was still blind in one eye. His classic chiseled face didn't have a single wrinkle, but there was a smile lingering at the edges of his mouth. It formed a stark contrast with his heavy gaze. At this moment, Zangwill felt that his face was a little livid. He had eye bags, and it was matched with the smile he couldn't understand. He appeared sinister, vicious, and strange. He lifted his hands, lowered his head, and saw black stain blocks under his fingernails. It was as though he had spent half the night digging up roots in the garden. Although he had switched from the death pathway to the Evernight pathway, and he had become a night watcher, Zangwill didn't lose the beyonder powers he had from before. He was still a powerful spirit guide in the domain of dead spirits. Therefore, he immediately planned to communicate with the spirits inside and outside the house to figure out what had happened last night. At this point, he saw the final passage on the notebook through the corner of his eye. Zangwill attempted to channel spirits, but sadly he realized that it was to no avail. It was as though a person of a similar profession had wiped out all clues. He was very worried, unaware of what he had embroiled himself with the previous night. Zangwill's expression turned heavy as he attempted to channel spirits. Within his expectations, he didn't receive any outcome which could be called a pleasant surprise. Wednesday morning, outside a Miras Leaf bar that had its shadow boss replaced. Klein circled around to a secluded alley and saw Oz Kent carrying a tiny suitcase. "Your bounty." Oz Kent threw the small suitcase over. This actually wasn't the bounty money in the true sense of the word. It was money the military had put forth. The former involved the Governor General's office and the kingdom's finance ministry. The procedure was complicated and needed at least 3 days to complete. Klein caught the suitcase and opened it on the spot. He saw stacks of neatly arranged cash, with most of them in 1 or 5 pound denominations. A total of 5,400 pounds. "We didn't take a cut," Oz Kent said as he forced a smile. If it were any other adventurer, he would have given 4,000 pounds at most. The rest was the income for the personnel involved in the entire procedure. But faced with the crazy man whose strength was close to a pirate admiral, all he could do was volunteer work thanks to his fear of being executed on the spot by him. "The military is unlikely to fool me with fake notes." Klein grabbed a stack of cash and waved it. 5,400 pounds. Hiding outside the alley, Darkwill heard Oz Kent's words and secretly shot a glance at the suitcase. The stacks of pound notes seemed to blind him. This was the first time he was seeing so much money placed together. An adventurer really is a profitable profession. Successfully hunting a pirate earns thousands of pounds. Protecting me nets him 1,000 pounds and one request. Occasionally, he can find sunken ships and treasure. Why did I become an apothecary instead of an adventurer? If I had known, I would have chosen that lucky Beyonder pathway. Darkwill thought with atypical admiration. However, he quickly recalled his reality. Most adventurers didn't live such rich lives. Even if they could make a killing, a third of their income was given to apothecaries, either to treat their injuries and remove any latent injuries, or to buy medicine to add to the fun and deal with unmentionable diseases. It's still safer being an apothecary. Darkwill sighed inwardly. At this moment, Klein, who had only did a rough count of the money, closed the suitcase and said to Oz Kent, "I'll be leaving Byam for some time. If I have any intel, how should I inform you?" "You're leaving Byam?" Oz Kent asked, finding it odd. Klein nodded slightly and said, "I received a bodyguard mission." Oz Kent was first enlightened before he felt a baffling sense of ease. If this madman were to stay in Byam for long periods of time, there will ultimately be a day where he causes problems. It's better to drift out at sea and fight those pirates. Oz Kent immediately said with a smile, "You can directly send me a telegram and include my address. We have people planted at the telegraph office." "All right." Dressed in a black tweed coat, Klein didn't speak further. With the suitcase in hand, he turned to leave the alley. He headed for the harbor together with Darkwill and planned to catch the earliest liner to Orovie Island. The owl flew in between the trees and appeared furtively. They had already bought scalp tickets the night before. Half an hour before they boarded the ship, Darkwill reeled with anxiety. He was afraid the person who had betrayed his teacher would suddenly rush over and attack him. This feeling continued until he entered the first-class cabin that belonged to him. As long as the liner went out into the sea, Beyonders without flight capabilities or their own ships would find it difficult to intercept him. "Quickly start the ship. Quickly start the ship." Darkwill looked out the window as he muttered to himself. At this moment, the owl had followed and perched on his left shoulder. Klein sat on a chair in the room, prepared for any possible attacks. At this moment, the sky suddenly turned dark as the wind howled with increasing strength. The air's humidity also clearly climbed. "A storm?" Darkwill widened his mouth as he blurted out. This meant that the ship might not set sail at the scheduled time. It might be delayed for hours. And with that, Darkwill wouldn't be able to withstand many of the unnecessary risks. He turned his head to look at Gehrman Sparrow and forced a smile. "Do you have any solutions?" "I do have one. For example, you can immediately pray to see God Calvetua, and I'll immediately answer your prayer above the gray fog. I'll disperse the storm. But it's without a doubt that in minutes, or maybe seconds, Sea King John Cotman will rush over. And his attacks will arrive earlier." Klein looked at the chubby apothecary and said calmly, "I'm only an adventurer." Darkwill knew that he shouldn't have had any expectations. He cursed the weather silently and turned around, looking out the window to check on the exact situation. Boom! A silver bolt of lightning struck Darkwill before Klein could even react. Darkwill immediately collapsed, convulsing as smoke emitted from his body. His skin was charred as snakes of lightning buzzed. Klein nearly fell into a shock. This was the first time he was seeing someone getting struck by lightning during a storm. That's way too unlucky, right? He briefly forgot to rescue Darkwill. The owl, Mr. Harry, was similarly stunned for a few seconds before it screamed, "Quick! Quick! There's a bottle of medicine in the second secret pocket on his left. Feed it to him. This owl can talk." Klein pricked up his brows, took a few steps forward, bent down, and found a bottle of blood-red medicine. Then, he poured it down Darkwill's throat. After a few minutes, Darkwill finally regained his senses. As charred black skin peeled off, he stood up with great difficulty. "I'll deal with my wounds." He staggered to his room and locked the door. After doing all of that, he took out the ring box and opened it with a solemn look. In the ring box with almost no room to roll, the milky white die had already changed at some point in time. 2 red dots were facing up. In the living room outside, Klein stood on the spot and recalled everything that had happened before frowning. At this moment in time, he had a baffling feeling that the enemies he would face during this bodyguard mission was probably going to be different from the enemies he encountered in the past. After Darkwill partially recovered and came out, Klein sat on the chair and leaned forward slightly. Explain. This determines how I should provide you with protection. Chapter 605, Judgment. Upon hearing Gehrman Sparrow, Darkwill's first reaction was to reveal everything about the strange die. He wanted this adventurer, that he had spent huge sums of money on, to grasp the problem at its roots so as to effectively ensure his personal safety. But on second thought, he recalled his teacher's exhortations. Believing that the die might very well be a rather important sealed artifact of the life school of thought, he was afraid that the truth would entice him to cause even more negative developments. There are plenty of rumors about adventurers who killed their employers during missions in order to earn greater benefits for themselves. I don't know Gehrman Sparrow, and I have no idea what kind of character he has. I need to be cautious. Besides, the die had automatically rolled a 2. The situation isn't at its worst and most despair-inducing. I can still wait for a chance. Darkwill hesitated for a few seconds and finally decided to talk about superficial matters while avoiding the key points. He subconsciously dodged Gehrman Sparrow's seemingly calm eyes. It's this. My teacher and I belong to a secret organization. I'm escaping because a traitor has appeared internally. They grasp the pathway related to fate and can make themselves sufficiently lucky and their target unlucky. I might have been cursed, so I was unlucky enough to be struck by lightning. After the explanation, he forcefully hid the nervousness in his heart and awaited Gehrman Sparrow's reply. Will he believe me? This kind of adventurer with rich experience and strength is likely hard to deceive. If he were to discover that I'm lying, he will likely sink me into the ocean. Darkwill stood there anxiously, like a student being summoned to the teacher's desk. He's indeed from the life school of thought. Monster pathway. Klein nodded in thought. I understand. Try to do as little as possible. I will consider how I'll deal with your bad luck. Darkwill was taken aback, completely unable to believe that Gehrman Sparrow would so easily accept a lie he fabricated on the spot. He forced a smile and quickly expressed his gratitude. Then, he returned to his room, leaning his back against the door as he took out the ring box. Paw! His hand trembled as he opened the lid, only to discover that the milky white die had already strangely rolled itself to have the 6th side facing up. Does this mean that I was lucky enough to successfully fool Gehrman Sparrow? Darkwill thought in enlightenment. Mr. Harry swooped down and didn't choose to perch on the chubby apothecary's shoulder. Apparently, it was still somewhat worried about how it could have also been implicated when Darkwill was nearly struck by lightning. It stood on a wooden desk and stared ahead with its round eyes. Darkwill, you're very nervous. You don't have to tell me that, Darkwill said in frustration. The owl spread its wings and said, All right, I'll use a different explanation. I believe I should consider changing owners. Gehrman Sparrow seems to be a pretty good choice. Then what about me? Darkwill asked in surprise, momentarily forgetting his anger. Mr. Harry sked and said, Don't you sense the concern and fear in your heart? You're already suspecting whether you can see tomorrow's sun. That strange die is really, really dangerous. If I were you, I would have thrown it out the window and into the sea and get your teacher's teacher to fish it out himself. How do you know about my teacher's teacher? Darkwill blurted out the question. Mr. Harry proudly lifted its head and said, Don't doubt an owl's vision. Darkwill fell into thought and didn't faze himself with its answer. No, that won't work. Throwing the die into the sea wouldn't resolve all my problems. According to Old Man, even if it's buried out at sea, any powerful person will be able to find it in days. That will mean that I'll really lose it. Silly bird. You lack general knowledge in mysticism, and you don't know how some important sealed artifacts are just like the most popular prostitutes in Red Theater. They'll always be able to attract hungry men. Including you, Harry calmly replied. As for the problem of being lacking in general knowledge in mysticism, I believe a famous quote can explain it. Emperor Roselle once said that if a child doesn't receive a good education, then it's the father's fault. This sentence can also be used to describe problems between a pet and its owner. Alright, Darkwill, regardless, I believe you need to discuss the die with Gehrman Sparrow. Otherwise, there will only be greater danger. Let me wait and see a little longer. Perhaps it will be fixed at 6, Darkwill said with some hesitation. He sat on the edge of the bed before lying down. At this moment, the storm that had been howling had gradually calmed down. The sky began to turn calm as the liner blew its horn, indicating that it was setting sail. Inside the first-class cabin's living room, Klein looked out the window and saw blurry rainbows that appeared after the rain. Yet, his heart wasn't calm. He wasn't too afraid of enemies. Out at sea, apart from the 4 kings and the official demigods, or the pirate admirals who appeared with their fleet, there were very few matters that could threaten him, who had creeping hunger and several mystical items. Even if the ship was sunk, he was able to escape thanks to the many charms he had from the sea god domain. But luck was something he really had no confidence in. It wasn't within the limits of his abilities, nor could he think of a way to handle it. Although my title is, the King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck, that was modified from the luck enhancement ritual. And the luck enhancement ritual clearly wasn't to allow people to get out of bad luck. Darkwill's matter is quite difficult to handle. I can only invest more effort into keeping a close eye on his situation. I'll immediately rescue him if something unlucky that can cause death happens. Let's hope that we can last for these few days until we arrived at Orvie Island. His seniors should be able to help him change his luck. Klein rubbed his temples, but he didn't show any abnormalities. Darkwill, who had been too nervous the previous night, fell into a deep sleep without realizing it. After a while, his stomach's growling informed him that it was time for lunch. He tried hard to open his eyes, but he felt as though an invisible person was pressing down on him, making it impossible for him to move. He felt the back of his head swelling with a sharp pain. He felt his breathing become more difficult as his heart raced at an abnormal pace. Don't tell me that I'm going to experience a sudden death in my dreams. Darkwill struggled with all his might, but he failed to wake up. He became weaker and weaker with time. At this moment, his mouth was opened up by a sharp object as an ice-cold liquid was poured in. The liquid also flowed down his face, wetting his chin and neck. Darkwill's body recovered as he finally managed to open his eyes. He saw 2 bright, round, gold-like eyes nearly slamming into his head. Rearing a Beyonder pet can be quite effective sometimes. Darkwill first felt wistful before he rapidly sat up and took out the ring box. Inside, the die had rolled to another side. 1 point. So unlucky that I almost died in my sleep. No, I don't think it's that simple. It seems to magnify certain probabilities such as the chances of being hit by lightning or the chances of experiencing sudden death while asleep. No, this can't carry on. If this continues, I'll definitely die. Darkwill thought in hysteria. Horror quickly overwhelmed his thoughts as he spurred his hand to hold onto the ring box and rushed to the door. Perhaps as a result of nearly suffering a sudden death, he was lacking in strength. He could hardly twist the handle. Help! Help! Mr. Harry screamed sharply. Bang! The door was opened, slamming into Darkwill's head. If Klein hadn't controlled his strength, the chubby apothecary's head probably would have cracked open with blood spewing out everywhere. Without even rubbing his bruise, Darkwill frantically shouted, "It's this! It's this! It's this die that gives me bad luck. When it's at 1 point, I'll fail at everything I do." He had already decided to inform Gehrman Sparrow of the whole truth, and he looked forward to the powerful adventurer giving him some effective suggestions. He didn't eliminate the possibility of him killing him out of greed, but he had weighed the matter. If he had to make a choice, he definitely chose the one which wasn't as terrible. Telling Gehrman Sparrow might lead to death, but not telling him would spell certain death. This choice was no longer something that needed consideration. I don't care if the die is lost. My life is more important. Darkwill thought with righteous indignation. Then, he saw a smile appear across Gehrman Sparrow's mouth. Thank you for your humor. The joke isn't too bad. It's not a joke. Darkwill looked down at the ring box and saw that there were no changes to the blood-red single point on the die. See, could it be that even an explanation with plenty of logic will fail? The chubby apothecary suddenly fell into despair. It's real. He's speaking the truth. Harry flapped its wings. Darkwill, who felt hope arise in him, heard Gehrman Sparrow say in a deep voice, "Then why don't you throw it into the ocean?" With that said, Klein politely closed the door and returned to the living room. This fellow must be hiding a secret. I mustn't be fooled by such a clumsy excuse. Klein sat in his chair and waited for Darkwill to describe the situation in detail. Darkwill sat down, depressed. He sat there motionless, afraid of encountering another failure. He didn't notice that the die had already switched its face again to a 3. Before lunch, Klein entered the washroom to clean out his digestive system. After washing his hands, he went above the gray fog in passing, preparing to browse through the prayers of the sea god believers. Just as he sat at the high-back chair of the fool, he suddenly recalled many details as his eyes widened. How could I believe such a weak explanation? Why do I think that it's because of that die? In the past 2 events, it felt like my mind had been clouded. No, it's not that. Darkwill's explanation happened to match certain theories of mine. Therefore, I instinctively believed it to be real and fake. Klein's eyes constricted as he thought about it. At that moment, he had already made a judgment. That die is indeed problematic. Chapter 606, Intimidation above the gray fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence. Klein tapped the edge of the model table as his thoughts revolved around the strange die. It can influence me without me realizing it. This is already somewhat similar to 0-08 from back then. It's just that one is right in front of me, while the other is hidden. It's definitely a sealed artifact, and it's the kind that exists at the very pinnacle. Even if it's not a grade 0, it has to be a very special existence among grade 1s. I'm temporarily unable to interfere with matters regarding fate, but I can't just passively face it. With the passage of time, objects at the level of sealed artifacts will often cause more severe damage. It might begin to affect people around the chubby apothecary, such as me or all the passengers on the ship. Klein thought over the matter seriously without any solutions in mind. He decided to immediately return to the real world. He didn't know how to seal the die or how to reduce its influence, but he knew someone had a clue. It was the snake of Mercury, Wilosepton, who was still inside his mother's womb as a fetus. Entering the master bedroom, he took out the paper crane in his wallet and placed it on the table. Klein took a look at the surface which still had signs of being erased. He picked up a pencil and wrote a simple question: how do I deal with that die? He folded the paper crane back to its original form, stuffed it in his wallet, and went to the door of the servant's room before knocking on it twice. This wasn't in violation of Gehrman Sparrow's persona, because he was a gentlemanly madman. Of course, Klein was mainly afraid of bashing Darkwill to death by rashly opening the door. This was something that he had learned from the movie franchise, Final Destination. In addition, Klein was also worried about witnessing something disgusting or unpleasant. With the preferences Darkwill has exhibited, when he realizes that he's in extreme danger and unable to extricate himself from it, with waiting for death being the only option available to him, there's a non-zero chance of him pleasuring himself to climax one last time. Klein lampooned as he heard the chubby apothecary's weak reply, "What's the matter? It's good that you aren't dead yet." Klein carefully opened the door and leaned his body a little forward, looking at Dark Will and the opened ring box which was sitting in front of him. He calmly asked, "What's the score? Can't you check it from the papers yourself?" Sports section. Dark Will remained listless. "I'm asking about the die," Klein simply added. "It's still at 3 points, Dark Will first answered instinctively before turning his head and jumping up. "You believe me?" Klein didn't reply so as to prevent him from recalling how Gehrman Sparrow had been fooled by the die. He turned around and said in an unperturbed tone, "Bring the die outside." "All right. All right." Dark Will and Harry cried out in joy almost at the same time. They either raised their arms or wings. After the chubby apothecary carefully carried the ring box out, Klein pointed at the coffee table and said, "Put it on there." As he said, he sat on the sofa beside it. He placed his arms on his thigh and leaned forward to observe the strange die. On the surface, the die didn't seem strange in any way when it came to mysticism. The only difference from an ordinary die was that it was dyed in red, even for 3 points. Klein didn't touch it out of caution. He slightly straightened his body and looked at Dark Will, who was seated across him on a chair, as well as the fat owl, Harry, who was perched on the chair's back. "Describe the exact situation." Dark Will didn't hide the matter any further as he said with a smile which looked worse than crying, "This is an important sealed artifact in our organization. My mission is to send it to a particular person in Orovie Island. But, as you can see, it's extremely dangerous. It will roll itself even when there's no space for it to do so. When it rolls a 6, the wielder will be sufficiently lucky. Everything can be done with relatively easy success, just like how my clumsy lie was able to fool you. Don't mention this matter. You will one day be taught a serious lesson because of that mouth of yours." Klein listened with a stoic expression. Dark Will continued, "1 point means that the wielder will be extremely unlucky. Nothing will succeed, you wouldn't believe me even if I were to tell you the whole truth. 2 points should be bad luck of a lesser degree, but as for why it would cause me to be struck by lightning, it's inexplicable. 3 points and 4 points are normal levels of bad luck and good luck. This can be confirmed. 5 points is the opposite of 2 points. You aren't considered unlucky enough, otherwise, I would have already beaten you up." Klein thought and calmly instructed, "From this moment forth, both of you will take turns to monitor this die. Once it drops below 3 points, you are to inform me immediately." "Both of us?" Dark Will wore a blank look for a moment. "Including me?" The owl perched on the edge of the chair's back raised its right wing. Klein leaned back into the sofa and crossed his right leg as he said calmly, "This will help in maintaining focus and energy." With that said, he gestured at the owl with his chin. "You're up first." "My name is Harry," the owl grumbled. "Harry." Klein resisted the urge to laugh as he said to Dark Will, "Pull the bell and get an attendant here. From this moment forth, we will choose to have room service for our meals. Before reaching Orovie Island, you have to be in the living room at all times. You are not to go anywhere. Even if you wish to use the washroom, it will be when it's at 3 or 4. If you really can't hold it in, I'll give you a bucket." Upon hearing Gehrman Sparrow give instructions with regularity and thoroughness, Dark Will calmed down a little at a time. He was no longer as horrified as before. The matter he was most worried about prior to this was that firstly, Gehrman Sparrow would be enticed by greed and choose to kill him for the die. Secondly, this somewhat crazy and cold adventurer might be frightened by the die, and that he would choose to terminate the mission and stop providing protection. And now, Gehrman Sparrow didn't show any fear, and he even seemed very confident. Dark Will secretly sighed in relief and thought, his performance was really professional. He isn't afraid at all. He can even escape the influence of the die and accept my explanation. He lives up to his name of being the powerful adventurer who easily hunted Wormtongue. He's definitely a powerhouse at the pirate admiral level." Dark Will stood up and walked to the door to pull the service bell. Just as he returned to the sofa, he heard Harry's sharp screech. It has changed. It has changed. 2 points. Suddenly, Klein exerted strength in his legs as he rose up from the sofa without warning and rushed to Darkwill's side. Bang! As a gunshot rang from outside, Klein pulled Darkwill's arm, swung his arm backward, and shook his wrist, throwing the chubby apothecary to the side. At this point, in the wall opposite to where Darkwill was standing, there was a bullet hole. Did a sailor's gun misfire? Or did the bullet ricochet when aiming at some seabird or something? Regardless of the situation, the chances of that happening are very low, yet. Klein turned his head to the chubby apothecary. Are you injured? Darkwill shook his head with a lingering sense of fear. I'm fine. In the time that followed, Klein resolved more than 10 accidents, one after another. It included the sudden collapse of the chandelier in the room, a hammer dropped by a slipping maintenance worker headed straight for Darkwill's head, as well as Darkwill nearly dying from choking on a fishbone. These didn't seem like anything serious, but for Klein to remain highly focused, it was inevitable for him to be exhausted. Thankfully, the die automatically rolled to 4 points later, finally ending the hour which was fraught with disasters. No, I can't continue like this. Who knows if something will happen to me when I'm rescuing him. Klein sent away the captain who came to apologize and said to Darkwill, I'll sleep for half an hour. Both of you are to watch the die. Immediately wake me up when there's a problem. The chubby apothecary and the owl nodded like a hungry woodpecker. Leaning back into the sofa, Klein used cogitation to quickly fall asleep, hoping to receive a reply from Willa Septon. When he woke up in his dream, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the pitch-black desolate plains. He followed the same old path and reached the depths of the black steeple. In the protruded ground surrounded by tarot cards, there were many new silvery lines that were densely written. Klein stopped walking and quickly read it. It's called the Die of Probability. It's a sealed artifact of the highest level in our school of thought. I believe it can reach the standard of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It controls the probability of everything. 1 point will maximize the probability of unfavorable matters occurring to the target. 2 points will raise the probability of unfavorable matters greatly. This doesn't mean that 2 points is safer than 1 point. This is because once the probability is high enough, any accident can happen. 3 points is to increase the probability of unfavorable matters. It's the opposite for 4 to 6 points. Even for me, a being who can reset it to a certain extent, it's a rather dangerous sealed artifact. A demigod can be killed using it, but of course, it can also kill yourself. I know, your contest with the Die of Probability is likely the equivalent to the battle between the god of save and load and the RNG sup 2/sup gods. Klein lampooned inwardly as he continued reading. The Die of Probability has living characteristics. It always makes the wielder swing back and forth between having good and bad luck. If one isn't careful, it's possible to die from an accident. When it awakens to a certain degree, it will control the people and objects around the wielder, controlling the probability of their actions. Although it hasn't been confirmed, I suspect that given enough time, it will be able to influence the entire world, making every action of all life be determined by its score. Of course, this is excluding deities. To put it simply, it's digitizing the entire world. This is definitely at the level of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It's extremely dangerous. How terrifying. Klein couldn't help but frown as he eagerly continued reading. To truly seal the Die of Probability is rather complicated. To put it simply, it's to use specific sealed artifacts to isolate it from the spirit world, astral world, and the real world. You can give it a try. I'll reveal my cards. I have long discovered that you can resist my prophetic senses. Perhaps you can use it to seal it. There's another way, but it can only briefly reduce its influence. However, this should be enough to send the Die of Probability to the hands of someone who can seal it. That method is to use the fact that it has living characteristics. use an effective method to intimidate it. That way, it will behave, calm down for a period of time. It will last about 12 hours before continuing. After repeated acts of intimidation, the influence it receives will decrease. After a week, it will mark you and madly control your probabilities. Finally, thank you for your help. Sincerely yours, Will Acceptin, as expected of a snake of fate. He has indeed discovered my uniqueness. Throwing the die of probability above the gray fog should be able to seal it. But the problem is that a grade 0 sealed artifact with living characteristics might influence the space above the gray fog and chase me away, making itself the owner. Such matters cannot be answered with divination. It will definitely be able to resist, just like 0-08. Klein rejected the idea of using the gray fog. As the thoughts whirled in his mind, he suddenly had an idea. Klein quickly left his dream and woke up. He said to Dark Will, I have a method of suppressing its influence. What is it? Dark Will asked in pleasant surprise. Klein didn't answer and picked up the die of probability, which had 4 points facing up, before entering the washroom. What does he want to do? I remember that in some folklore, the way they treat evil objects is to throw shit. Ugh. Dark Will didn't wish to think further. After entering the washroom and locking the door, Klein immediately set up a ritual to summon himself. Following that, he went above the gray fog and brought out the iron cigar case. Then, he picked up the die of probability and opened the cigar case. Inside the cigar case was the all-black eye which came from the Nimblewright Master. Under the darkness, Klein's face was cloaked in the shadows and he watched with a deep and gloomy gaze as he brought the die of probability close to the strange eye. It was a Beyonder characteristic which contained the true creator's mental corruption. The corners of his mouth cracked open as he revealed a genial smile and whispered to the die in his hand, Here, let me treat you to a concert. Chapter 607, Discovering an abnormality. The window of the washroom was very high, preventing sufficient sunlight from shining in. It could only barely dispel the darkness, making everything seem gloomy. Klein moved the die of probability in his right hand to the all-black eye, and suddenly, it shook. Then, he threw the item into the other side of the wash basin. The milky white die rolled a few times before finally stopping with 4 red dots pointing up. Klein held back his unobvious smile and took a step to the side and picked up the die of probability again. He lowered his head and said in a gentlemanly manner, You don't wish to listen to it. Let's do this. Give me an answer. 6 represents cooperation, while everything else represents a rejection. With that said, he threw the die of probability up and reached out to catch it. The milky white die fell straight down and rapidly rolled, showing 6 red dots. Very good, Klein praised with a chuckle. After throwing the all-black eye back above the gray fog, he turned to open the door to the washroom and slowly walked to the living room. Under Darkwill's and Harry's gaze, which was filled with anticipation, worry, curiosity, and puzzlement, he suddenly stopped and threw the die of probability out. No! No! Darkwill and the owl cried out at the same time, afraid that a score of 3 points and below would happen. The latter subconsciously flew up to distance itself from the fatty who might be struck by lightning. With a crisp tinkle, the milky white die rolled on the coffee table several times before fixing itself at 2 points. Just as the color in Darkwill's face drained, the die languidly rolled and fixed itself on 4. For the next 12 hours, it will be relatively quiet. Klein calmly sat down and began enjoying his breakfast which had long turned cold. He really had a solution. Darkwill lowered his body and stared at the strange die on the coffee table. After nearly a minute, he couldn't help but extend his hand and throw the die, managing to roll a 6. Just as his palm left, the die moved by itself to 4. How magical! What method did Gehrman Sparrow actually use? Did he really shit and soak the die inside? Ugh! Darkwill decided to accept the outcome and stop thinking of the reason, otherwise, he suspected that he would end up vomiting. Looking up at Gehrman Sparrow, who was calmly spreading butter on his bread, Darkwill suddenly felt that with just a promise and 1,000 pounds to hire a bodyguard at this level was extremely worth it. He can definitely be ranked at the same level as any pirate admiral. If a tycoon were to encounter a situation like mine, they wouldn't hesitate to hire him with half their wealth. Thankfully, I only paid 300 pounds. The rest will be borne by teacher and the others. Darkwill felt relieved when he realized that he didn't need to worry about the dice random rolling for the next 12 hours. He couldn't help but stand up and stretch his back. He walked to the window and opened the tightly shut window to see the sparse clouds scattered across the clear skies. The endless azure blue sky stirred as it reflected the bright sunlight like it had countless golden fragments scattered in it. This energized Darkwill as he felt a burden be lifted from his chest. Unlike Backlund, which would only become warm at the end of February, the Rørsted archipelago was no longer plagued by the cold. Life had returned to this area, facing the sea and the blooming of flowers in warm spring. Klein, who had finished his bread, walked to a spot behind Darkwill and felt like he was an animal who had awoken from hibernation. He didn't recite the poem that flashed past his mind, as firstly, it didn't suit Gehrman Sparrow's persona, and secondly, it would probably make Darkwill reflect over Emperor Rosel's poetic talent. Until the evening, the die still didn't roll, but the weather had changed. Strong winds howled as dark clouds gathered. A storm was brewing. This was the most common danger at sea. Even if one took a safe sea route which had been traversed by others, one would occasionally encounter similar situations. It just wasn't as terrifying. Klein looked at the tall waves and the dark sky, and he felt as though the ship was cruising through a mountain valley. By the sides were tall dark blue cliffs that could topple down at any moment. The intense pressure made a mid-sequence beyonder like him feel repressed. He even wished to pray to God, hoping that the liner would cruise through the storm safely. It's no wonder sailors, pirates, and merchants who live on the sea for extended periods of time can't help but respect the Lord of Storms. They would more or less believe in him. Klein sighed in silence. Although he didn't believe the storm that wasn't that powerful could bury a liner which was powered by both sails and steam engines, he still attached caution to the matter by praying to his alternate identity, sea god Calvetua. He was afraid that the die of probability would suddenly go crazy during the storm and roll a 1, causing the ship to sink to the bottom of the sea. Therefore, he decided to make preemptive precautions. Klein did believe Snake of Fate will Oseptin's judgment that the die of probability would be quiet for 12 hours after the first intimidation act, but this was without any additional conditions. He believed that it was more likely that a sealed artifact with living characteristics would deal with situations like a person instead of rules. Hence, he had to take precautions for any troubles it might cause. Stealing a glance at Darkwill and the owl who were looking somewhat uneasy due to the storm, Klein calmly said, "I'll take a nap. Continue watching the die. Take turns and do not relax." "All right." Watching Gehrman Sparrow enter the master bedroom, Darkwill walked to the side of the coffee table and sat down. As he stared at the die, he asked Harry, "What thoughts do you have now?" Harry flew around and mumbled, "Why am I not a petrel?" In the master bedroom, Klein went above the grey fog and summoned the sea god scepter from the junk pile. He held the scepter with blue gems embedded at the top and quickly replied to his prayer. Klein didn't expend too much of his spirituality to calm the storm. This was firstly because they weren't too far from the surrounding seas of the Rørsted archipelago. Such an obvious and exaggerated supernatural phenomenon was easily able to attract the attention of Sea King John Cotman, who shared the same domain, or the storm priests on the ships. Secondly, he had to conserve strength to deal with the die of probability. What he did was simple. He augmented the ship with layers of beyonder effects, allowing it to cruise through the storm stably without any risk of capsizing. Towards a sequence 5 or 6 beyonder below the rank of demigod, to do something similar to a liner which had hundreds of people on board required plenty of preparations and a complicated ritual. It was only possible by exhausting them, but to a sea god of this domain, it was all simple and easy. A demigod already has inklings of a god. Klein sighed and threw the scepter back into the junk pile, before silently disappearing from above the gray fog. In the time that followed, the ship bobbed up and down like a leaf in the wind, but no matter how terrifying or towering the dark blue waves were, nothing happened to it until the end of the storm. At 4 p.m. on Thursday. Backlund, Williams Street. Furs Wall once again arrived here by carriage. She didn't sit in the coffee shop again. Instead, she strolled down the street and observed the pedestrians and surrounding buildings. She also took note of figures with special traits as material for her novel. There really are a lot of foreigners. They're still mainly from Faisac and Intis. Haha, one of them is a barbaric and stocky white bear, while the other is a colorful, ostentatious rooster. Furs chuckled silently to herself. At this moment, she came to the middle of Williams Street where there was an abandoned chapel. Withered vines crawled over its walls, and gray stones were strewn everywhere. With the intention to not waste Mr. World's payment, Furs deliberately approached it to check for any abnormalities. She circled around the chapel without discovering anything. Following that, she entered and avoided the disgusting shit and rotten things, and she quickly observed every corner. Suddenly, her gaze came to a stop as she frowned bit by bit. In a particular corner of the half-collapsed ruin, the ground had been dug up by someone. The pit wasn't too big or deep, and there were remnant traces of it being dug with fingers. This should be considered an abnormality, right? Furs cautiously retreated and didn't do a detailed investigation. After walking through all of Williams Street, she immediately returned home and organized the abnormality and material she jotted down together. She then sacrificed it to Mr. Fool and asked him to hand it over to the world. Furs didn't conceal anything she saw, even if they didn't seem to have any superficial problems. This was because she knew very well that any abnormality would be judged by the world, and not by herself who didn't understand the situation. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein immediately began reading the report Miss Magician had submitted. That abandoned chapel has signs of being dug up. The previous digging attempts had been dealt with by me and Miss Sharon. Who would dig it up again? Rafter Pound, that descendant of the Tudor family. He nearly died from the evil spirit's possession. Without any helpers, it's unlikely he would take further risks. Who could it be? Klein thought for a moment, but he couldn't lock onto a suspect. All he could do was continue reading. While he read the notes written in a beautiful language, he acutely noticed a point. There are many foreigners on this street. They are mainly from Faisac and Intis. It wasn't like that back when I went to Williams Street. Did a Faisac or Intis company recently open there? Faisac, Intis. Klein ruminated over the two countries' names when he suddenly recalled something. The royal family of the Faisac Einhorn, the Einhorn family, and Intis' former royal family, the Sauron family, are both in control of the Hunter pathway, which is also the Red Priest pathway. It was two of the blood types which the evil spirit had designated as being capable of removing the seal. Together with the Medici family's descendants which had been destroyed at Bansi Harbor, the three factions which held control over the Red Priest pathway are involved. Bansi Harbor was destroyed, causing the Medici family's Beyonder characteristic to use some magical connection to contact the evil spirit who is suspected to be Red Angel. Hence, the members of the Einhorn and Sauron families were attracted. No, that's not realistic. If the Church of Storms didn't discover any Beyonder characteristics, they definitely would have noticed a problem in this. Another reason. The evil spirit is using another method to attract people from the Einhorn and Sauron families? What or who did it go through in order to do so? The number of people who know of the evil spirit's existence is only a handful, me, Miss Sharon, as well as. Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein suddenly thought of a possibility. It was Rafter Pound, the descendant of the Tudor family who had previously been possessed by the evil spirit. He had unknowingly become a slave of the evil spirit. He had secretly helped it spread the news. And the evil spirit had sought me and Miss Sharon's help to numb us into thinking that we are the only ones who can rescue it. For this, it didn't mind betraying its descendants. Klein was alarmed as he felt like he had been fooled by the evil spirit. Chapter 608, Professional. The endless gray fog hung silently before a light scraping noise on the bronze table sounded. Klein changed his seating posture and began placing more weight on the details regarding the evil spirit. He was more and more convinced that Miss Sharon and himself had neglected the possibility of something happening to Rafter Pound. This is a beyonder power of the Red Priest pathway, conspiracist. Furthermore, this is even closer to a common fraud. There's only the use of supernatural powers in the details. Therefore, even if I had arrived at the mysterious space above the gray fog, I would passively have my senses fooled. I would have only discovered the problem by proactively considering and analyzing the situation. If it wasn't for Mr. Azik, who knew of the evil spirit suspected to be the dead Red Angel Medici, I wouldn't have realized this problem. Nor would I have hired Miss Magician to seek out any abnormalities on William Street. After a few minutes of contemplation, Klein conjured a pen and paper, preparing to use divination to confirm his theories. After deliberating for a moment, he finally penned the sentence for the dream divination, Baronet Rafter Pound's current situation. After putting down his dark red fountain pen, Klein held the piece of paper with the divination statement and leaned back in his chair. He first recalled the information he had regarding Rafter Pound before closing his eyes, chanting silently, and entering cogitation. Klein's thoughts rapidly calmed down as he quickly entered a dream state. In a gray world, disconnected scenes flashed past before finally fixating on Unit 29 on Civilhouse Street. Inside the warm activity room, Rafter Pound was dressed in cotton pajamas, holding a wine cup with red liquid. He was standing silently by the window, looking at the Backland police station headquarters diagonally across the street. This baronet had gray sideburns and puffy eye sockets that were tainted with blackish-green colors. The wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes and mouth were so pronounced that it exceeded what someone in his 40s should look like. His pupils weren't dilated in a very serious manner, but they were abnormal. His cheeks were flushed red as he had a furtive smile. He looked slightly abnormal compared to the last time Klein met him. Indeed, something is wrong with him. Klein left the dream and began considering how he could deal with the evil spirit. Without a doubt, he had his usual train of thought for such matters. Under the situation where he was unable to contact Miss Sharon, his first reaction was to report the matter. But how should it be reported? Klein considered it seriously and conjured the world's figure and made him pray. Through a reliable channel, pass this information to the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. The information is, high-level spies from Fasak and Intis are gathered at William Street for unknown motives. Reward of £100. This was the explanation Klein thought of after repeated consideration. Directly revealing the King of Angels, Red Priest, the Medici family, or the Tudor dynasty's ruin would indeed garner the attention of the churches and military, but it would also easily make Miss Magician, who reported the matter, to be targeted by the official organizations. There were huge risks involved. Not only was using high-level spies from Fasak and Intis are gathered at William Street relatively milder, something which ordinary beyonders had a chance of noticing, but it was also something that would make the churches and the military wary. They would send out the corresponding experts to employ the most effective methods. As for the subsequent fruits of the investigations, it was all thanks to their contributions and had nothing to do with the reporting party. Klein had considered getting Mr. Azik to help, but he ultimately chose to abandon the thought. This was because the evil spirit was suspected to be a king of angels and was very dangerous. Mr. Azik, who was still in the stage of recovering, might not be able to deal with it. After some thought, Klein turned the conjured scene into a stream of light and transmitted it to the crimson star representing the magician. Backlund, Sherwood Borough. When Furs received the response from Mr. World, she was taken aback. Those are high-level spies from Fasak and Intis. She exclaimed to herself, believing that there was no way she could have inferred something like that with the information she had provided. However, she quickly felt at ease, believing that the reason why Mr. World had suspicions of abnormalities in William Street was precisely because he had received the corresponding intel of high-level spies. Once he confirmed the appearances of people from Faysac and Intis, it was easy for him to make such a conclusion. Pass this information to the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam? Isn't that a euphemistic way of saying, report? Unfortunately, I won't be able to watch from the sideline, or I'm sure a great show would unfold. Furs wasn't a stranger to reporting matters. After all, her housemate and good friend was a bounty hunter. She quickly had an idea, deciding to hand the matter of reporting the intel to the experienced Zio. When she came out of the bedroom, she saw Zio sitting on a sofa. She was flipping through documents about her target, raising her hand to grab at her messy blonde hair from time to time and appearing extremely serious. Furs casually picked up an item to embellish her motives and came over to the sofa. She handed over the item. Here, have a piece of cake. Zio glanced at the cake slathered with a layer of cream. Without losing focus, she raised her hand to grab it. At this moment, Furs flipped her wrist, and the cake in her palm had turned into a golden decorative flower. Surprised, she asked with a smile. Zio couldn't help but roll her eyes. Stop your performance. I prefer food. All right. I have a matter for you to do. 70 pounds. Furs smiled as she sat down. After first dealing with the evil spirits matter, Klein returned to the real world and held a ritual in passing. He brought the radio transceiver, which had been placed above the gray fog for several days, back to his first-class master bedroom. He lay in bed and used cogitation to recover his energy until he was awoken by the tapping sounds. When Klein opened his eyes, the crimson moonlight had already shone in, blanketing the dim room like a veil, as well as the radio transceiver which was automatically spewing out illusory white paper. This really feels like a horror film. A shame it's connected to a magic mirror without any moral integrity or bottom line. Klein sat up and walked over. He saw lines of Loanese on the illusory white paper. Honorable existence above the spirit world, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, has arrived and would like to greet you. Do you have something you would like to test me on? Look at this, look. This is what I call smooth talking. This is what a professional is like. In that instant, Klein really wished to pull Darkwill into the room to witness the magic mirror's art of communication. I clearly have questions to ask it, but it becomes a situation of me testing it. And it even threw in a question. Klein controlled the curling of his mouth as he replied in a deep voice, yes. Please speak. The ignorant and limited Rhodes is ready. Amidst the tapping sounds, the illusory paper no longer produced Loanese, but instead produced a fawning smiley face. This is already the emergence of emoticons. This fellow evolves really quickly. Klein directly asked, where can I obtain a mystical item which can steal the beyonder powers of others? The tapping sounds suddenly became intense as the illusory white paper quickly produced scenes like a screenshot from a movie. There were places which Klein was familiar with, such as Tingen City's St. Selena Cathedral's Cheney's Gate, the black-haired, green-eyed, handsome poet, Leonard Mitchell, a middle-aged man who sat on a sofa smiling at the noble ladies opposite him, and a young arrogant lady who was loitering in the sewers. There were a total of 12 scenes, and finally a line of Loanese text appeared. These are the ones that you can easily or conveniently acquire one from. There are a lot more, but they are either very complicated or troublesome, or they range at the highest levels which I cannot see clearly. Not bad. He actually knows to help me filter. This is a fantasy and mystical version of Google. Klein gently nodded and said, despite knowing the answer, it's your turn to ask. You have already answered. Amidst the tapping, Rhodes's unsurprising answer appeared on the illusory white paper. Klein chuckled inwardly and asked, where will Leonard Mitchell be staying for the time being? The tapping sounds became intense again as one scene after another appeared before Klein's eyes. It was a famous landmark in Backlund, a towering Gothic bell tower with a bell of order hanging above. There was a road sign on the road with the words, Pinster Street. It was Unit 7 along a row of terrace houses. In it, there was the extremely suave Leonard Mitchell wearing a black coat and red gloves. He was Klein's poet friend who was reading through the dossiers of Lenevis and Capim. This fellow is in Backlund, and he's investigating the Lenevis and Capim cases. What the hell? The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly as he carefully thought of the clues he left behind in those two cases. The only clue is that Detective Sherlock Moriarty is involved in the two cases. If Leonard enters Daisy's dream, he should discover this point. But, I already kept a beard and had a pretty good disguise back then. It's unlikely that he can recognize me in the rather blurry scene in the dream and portraits. As long as he doesn't recognize me, it doesn't matter. What has problems with Sherlock Moriarty have to do with me, Gairman Sparrow? Klein retracted his thoughts and memorized Leonard Mitchell's current residence. 7 Pinster Street, Backlund. He planned on entrusting the Moon Emlyn White to visit Leonard Mitchell the day after tomorrow and use the badge of the Hermits of Fate to purchase a mystical item. I hope my dear poet friend has additional items to spare. If not, the price will definitely be at a premium. Klein tersely answered and said to the radio transceiver, "It's your turn to ask." He was honestly curious as to what a Rhodes would ask this time. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out new illusory paper. On it was a question composed in Loanese: "Great Master, Leonard Mitchell has a huge secret. Do you wish to know?" This can also be considered a question. Klein raised his head in amusement and surprise as he looked at the crimson moon which was silently illuminating the dark sea. Soon, he honestly gave an answer. Yes. Chapter 609, Paying a Visit. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out a brand new piece of illusory white paper under the crimson moonlight in the dim environment. Inside Leonard Mitchell resides an angel from the Zoroast family. He once changed my question. Angel? There's an angel residing in Leonard's body? An angel from the fourth epoch's Zoroast family? Although Klein was mentally prepared to hear an incredible secret, he was still shocked by what a Rhodes divulged. He was deeply concerned and surprised as well. An angel referred to Beyonders at sequence 1 or 2, making them rather close to the state of a true god. They had all sorts of mystical characteristics, and they could even influence low-sequence Beyonders of the same pathway to a certain extent and range. They were mighty figures who stood at the pinnacle of the real world. In the various churches, only their popes, pontiffs, chief shepherds, as well as certain legendary ascetics were grounded angels. Therefore, Klein believed that being latched onto by a parasite of this level wasn't a good thing. In the dark second epoch, the angels all had their divine names, and they were subsidiaries to the ancient gods. I haven't indirectly or directly interacted with many angels: Blasphemer Amon, Calamity Queen Kohainam, the evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel Medici, Tail Devourer Ouroboros as described by Little Sun, Miracle Invoker Zeradal from Roselle's diaries, son of the creator, Adam, Hermes who cannot be confirmed if he's an angel or not, Snake of Fate, Will Acceptan, who's still inside his mother's womb. Apart from the last two, the others appear to be very evil. Even the words they leave behind might make the reader go crazy or lose control. Would my dear poet ultimately end up as a sacrificial item of this angel parasite? This can explain why he thinks of himself as the protagonist of a play, the special one, and he was willing to help me hide my secret. The Zoroast family is in control of the Marauder pathway, which is the pathway that can steal the Beyonder powers of others. That's why Leonard was able to find and participate in the gathering of the Hermits of Fate. It's no wonder he offered to use Blood Vessel Thief, it's because he has a grandpa to help him. He was able to instantly steal Magos's most potent power. Ha, what Hermits of Fate? They're just a bunch of thieves and frauds. At best, the target of their theft and fraud is that of time and fate. In short, my dear poet's grandpa isn't a good person. I have to find a chance to warn him. But here comes the problem, they're always together. Any warning will only expedite the problem. Klein's thoughts raced, but he ultimately failed to come up with an option he can act upon. All he could do was temporarily shelve the matter and plan on asking Mr. Azek and Snake of Mercury, Will Septon, to see if they had any solutions. In those few minutes, he even thought of using Blasphemer Amon. To put it simply, it was to divulge information to the son of the creator that the angel from the Zoroast family was residing in Leonard Mitchell's body, getting him to eat up the parasite. According to what Klein knew, the Amon family supported the Tudor Empire during the Fourth Epoch, while the Zoroast family belonged to the Solomon Empire, making the two enemies. Furthermore, according to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, powerhouses from the same pathway would have greater conflicts the higher their sequence was. This was akin to the battle between the two snakes of Mercury. Unfortunately, this solution was restricted by reality and was ultimately abandoned by Klein. This was because he didn't know where to find Blasphemer Amon. Secondly, he was afraid that the battle at the level of angels would directly destroy Leonard Mitchell. And thirdly, a powerful Amon might be a very bad and serious matter. I'll first get Emlyn to attempt the transaction and observe the actual situation. I can decide on what to do when I know more. Klein retracted his thoughts and said to the radio transceiver which was connected to a Rhodes, Ask your question. The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker as the illusory white paper was gently spewed out. No, there's no need. This is an addendum to my question which doesn't need to abide by the rules. Great Master, I sense a special item outside your room, but I am unable to see through it. Can you tell me what it is? This magic mirror is impressive. It seems to be able to see everything. It just suffers from interference when it deals with high-level matters as though there's a mosaic. Klein calmly replied, Die of probability. Amidst the taping sounds, Rhodes presented new words on the illusory piece of white paper. So it's that thing. Great Master, you can ask your question. Klein thought for a moment before saying, What do you have to mention regarding the die of probability? At this point in time, the radio transceiver seemed to brighten up and no longer looked as gloomy as before. The speed at which illusory white paper spewed out slowed down. It's a fellow that's especially petty and bears grudges. Master, you have to quickly give it to someone else. It's an item formed from the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune. You can give it to any other snake of fate and they will be very grateful. In short, it's not suitable to be your servant. The aura is dissipating. Your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, has no choice but to leave. Finally, let me praise you once again, my great master, the ruler above the spirit world. Bye-bye, uniqueness. The die of probability is actually the uniqueness of the monster pathway. This is the first time I'm encountering a so-called uniqueness. It really is terrifying that can digitize the entire real world. The monster pathway is also called the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Sequence 0 is the Wheel of Fortune. Klein looked at the radio transceiver which had returned to normal, and he temporarily reined in his thoughts. He didn't harbor any greed towards the die of probability. This was because it wasn't part of the seer pathway, and it came with extremely terrifying negative side effects. He was also afraid that, with time, this die which bore grudges would attract tail devourer Ouroboros over. Even if this thing can be isolated and sealed when placed above the gray fog, there's a high chance of it digitizing the entire mysterious space. In the future, the tarot gatherings might end up becoming a tabletop role-playing game. Klein had never come into contact with items of this level before, so he was unable to determine what would happen if he were to throw the die of probability above the gray fog. He decided to continue intimidating the die, and he would successfully send it to Oravi Island where there would be Life School of Thought members who had the means to seal it. As for the problem of the mission exceeding the payment he would receive, he didn't mind it. This was because the greatest benefit he would gain was the friendship of the Snake of Fate Will Septon. Backlund, Harvest Church. Emlyn White held a strange badge which was the size of an eyeball and chuckled inwardly. The world sure is long-winded. Isn't it just finding a nighthawk named Leonard Mitchell at Pinster Street in Northborough? He even specially emphasized that the person has a secret and that there's a high chance of me being pulled into a dream. This is showing doubt in my abilities. Emlyn stood up and changed into a tailcoat and white shirt. He then turned his head to look out the window. Ha, he has a secret, while I have mine. I dare bet that Lord Nibs or other earls are secretly watching me. If anything were to happen, they will definitely provide me with help to a certain degree. Being pulled into a dream. Emlyn contemplated for a few seconds before using the materials which were rich in spirituality to concoct a blue medicine. Putting away the bottle and medicine, he picked up a silk top hat and walked out of the break room. After bidding farewell to Bishop Utravsky, he left the Harvest Church. It was still morning, but Backlund's sky was gloomy. There was a faint fog that spread like water. Emlyn squinted his eyes and wore his hat, murmuring to himself, "The sunlight is a little blinding." He hailed a rental carriage and went straight for the steam metro station. He spent 6 pence on a first-class ticket to Northborough. This saved him a lot more time than heading straight there. About 40 minutes later, he arrived at his destination and stood outside the door of 7 Pinster Street. Emlyn politely rang the doorbell and patiently waited for a minute. Just as he was about to write a note and stuff it into the hole beneath the door to schedule a better time for a visit, he suddenly heard languid footsteps approaching. Doesn't sound like a servant. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly and took out the medicine he had concocted in advance and cleanly drank it. Then, he watched the door open and saw a black-haired, green-eyed man appear before him. He was dressed in home wear, a white shirt and black trousers. His shirt was untucked, allowing it to flutter gently in the wind. Amidst his suaveness were hints of uninhibited freedom. Although he's a believer of evernight, I have to say that his looks are barely comparable to us sanguine. Emlyn took off his hat and gently raised his chin. Good morning, are you Mr. Leonard Mitchell? Leonard frowned indiscernibly as he looked at the handsome, red-eyed gentleman. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and indifferently yawned. You are a visitor. I have something I would like to seek your help on. Emlyn didn't reveal his identity as he smiled with a rather obvious arrogance. This attitude gave Leonard a baffling sense of familiarity. It was as though he had seen his former self, the person who always thought of himself as being the most special, the protagonist of this era. He cleared his throat and said, I'm only an ordinary citizen. I do not accept missions. If you have any issues, then you can find a private detective. Emlyn White smiled and said, this matter is something only you can complete. He looked to his sides and continued, I wish to purchase a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. Leonard's eyes focused as he asked in a deep voice, who are you? At this moment, Emlyn didn't immediately answer. Instead, he surveyed his surroundings and clicked his tongue with a smile. Impressive. I nearly failed to realize that I had been pulled into a dream. He wasn't in a rush to leave as he took out the small badge he received from the world in front of Leonard Mitchell's solemn expression. Leonard took a glance as his expression eased slightly. He cocked his head slightly and paused for a few seconds. Silently, Emlyn White saw the scene around him rapidly shatter and vanish like shattering glass. Leonard sneered and pointed inside the house. Let's talk inside. Chapter 610, Throwing the Die. Upon hearing Leonard Mitchell's invitation, Emlyn didn't show any fear. He held his top hat and wore a subtle smile before entering the house without any qualms. He didn't take off his coat, as a potions professor often brought several supplementary items. It wouldn't look pleasant once the concealment of these items was gone. Emlyn sat down with his starched tailcoat, leaning back into the support as he leisurely said, Actually, there's no need to go through the trouble. If you have it, name the price, otherwise, just frankly say so. Of course, I'm very certain you have one. He chuckled as his bright red eyes reflected Leonard Mitchell's figure that didn't mind the tidiness of his get-up. The feeling of, me knowing you have a secret, with you not knowing anything about me, left Emlyn extremely pleased as he felt a strong sense of superiority. Leonard used his fingers to comb his raven black hair and casually sat on the chair opposite Emlyn. He didn't show any panic or puzzlement as he said with a smile, at the very least, I need to know who wants it. Perhaps it's me, or perhaps it's my friend. Emlyn tipped his chin as he smiled gently. Leonard squinted his eyes as he cocked his head, as though in thought. Finally, he laughed. All right, since you've already taken out that badge, I'll answer you frankly. I do have a mystical item that can be used to steal the beyonder powers of others, but I only have that one item. If you wish to buy it, 7,000 pounds. No negotiation. 7,000 pounds? A mystical item of this kind is that expensive? Although he didn't have to pay for it, Emlyn was still shocked. He nearly failed to maintain his bearing as a sanguine. He automatically converted how much money that could be used to exchange for dolls and doll dresses. After 2 seconds of thought, Emlyn revealed a smile and said, I'll consider it. I'll answer you in 2 days. Sure. Leonard curled the corners of his lips. After leaving 7 Pinster Street, Emlyn hired a rental carriage as though nothing had happened as he headed for the steam metro station in Northborough, before heading back to the bridge at Southborough. Taking off his hat, he looked back at the street which had carriages and pedestrians passing through. Emlyn chuckled and took a step into the Harvest Church. In between a tree and a black street lamp, an inconspicuous shadow suddenly moved, revealing the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. His appearance was silent, but it didn't garner the attention of any pedestrians. Someone from the Church of Earth Mother? Leonard frowned slightly as he muttered to himself. He paused for 2 seconds before leaving Rose Street where the Harvest Church was situated. 7,000 pounds? Why doesn't he just go rob a bank? Above the grey fog, Klein, who had received the feedback from Emlyn, nearly blurted out. As Gairman Sparrow, he had previously said something similar, but the two situations and the mood was completely different. Using the bounty of the Golden Dream's third mate, Flowery Bow-Tie Jodson, as a reference, Klein inferred that a similar mystical item was worth about 5,000 pounds. Even if there was a premium, it would have maxed out at 6,000 pounds. Who knew that Leonard Mitchell would directly ask for 7,000 pounds? Could it be an item left behind from a high-sequence Beyonder, making the act of stealing Beyonder powers just one of its effects? No, if that's really the case, the price would start from 10,000 pounds. My dear poet, why didn't I know you as a profiteering merchant? You clearly exhibit a free and easy demeanor and showed no interest in money. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Since he had a clue and saw a glimmer of hope and how it was something that could be resolved with money, Klein didn't wish to seek out other channels to prevent any mishaps from happening. He quickly calculated his wealth and discovered that it was an acceptable price. Including the £300 advance from the apothecary, the £5,400 bounty from Wormtongue, and the cash I got from the bodies, and subtracting the £200 to be paid to Miss Magician, I have a total of £12,767 in cash and 5 gold coins. This isn't including my 3 soldi and 8 pence in change. In addition, Miss Justice will pay the £2,000 she owes me before the end of the week, as well as the £1,800 for the psychiatrist characteristic. I'm actually richer than I thought I was. Even in Backlund, I can be considered a tycoon. Klein inhaled and didn't hesitate any further. He made the cash fly out from the junk pile and land on the table. He carefully counted £7,500 in cash and placed them aside, £7,000 for the mystical item, and £500 for Emlyn's hazardous pay. Sigh, after going through all the effort to go past 10,000, more than half of it will be gone in an instant. Klein conjured the world and made him pose in a praying manner to inform Emlyn that there were no problems with going through with the transaction. 15 minutes later, a ritual was to be held to receive the bestowment from Mr. Fool. In addition, Klein also made the world warn Emlyn to not be in a rush to complete the deal after getting the cash. He had to wait until tomorrow. This was because he was afraid that the angel from the Zoroast family inside Leonard Mitchell would sense the gray fog's aura on the cache. He wanted an airing process, just like back when he gave Emlyn the badge. 15 minutes later, Klein glanced at the cache pile which had shrunk by more than half and sighed before returning to the real world. It was already 10:40 on a Friday. They were about 8 hours from Orvie Island. It's time to intimidate the die of probability again. Klein muttered, held the ritual, and brought out the iron cigar case which contained the all-black eye. He guessed that Dark Will would suspect something, so he deliberately brought the die to the washroom to deal with it. Seeing the die of probability calm down once again, Klein quickly dealt with the all-black eye and the iron cigar case. After heaving a long sigh of relief, he did a silent count of the time. It should be enough to last until Dark Will hands it to the contact. There's no need to deal with it again. With this in mind, Klein began to consider another problem with a certain degree of concern. The all-black eye has appeared in front of the true creator before, and it has his mental corruption. To take it out once every few hours might cause him to lock onto me, allowing him to send powerhouses to seek me out. However, it was only 1 or 2 minutes each time, so the problem isn't that serious. Even if he senses it, their estimate of the area wouldn't be too precise. Sigh, when it involves the true creator, there's no way to determine things with divination. I can only raise my guard. Thankfully, this is the last time, and it will take only about 8 hours to reach our destination. Why am I raising flags for myself? Pooey. 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 I wasn't thinking of anything. Klein picked up the die of probability and returned to the living room and saw the chubby apothecary slumped on the reclining chair, looking completely exhausted. As for the owl, Harry, it looked like it was brimming with energy, as though it didn't need any rest. These are the different traits that different creatures gain from taking the same potion. At the very least, Miss Justice has never mentioned that she doesn't need sleep. It's a uniqueness that comes about because of an owl's biological makeup. Sigh, I don't know much about owls. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior who is only a jack of all trades. Klein sat on the sofa and placed the milky white die into the ring box and patiently waited for evening to arrive when the ship was scheduled to dock. Time ticked by as the sun gradually set in the west. At this point in time, Klein, who had his eyes closed, suddenly sat up, having sensed an extreme danger befall the area. It had exceeded a seer's spiritual intuition and the clown's intuition for danger. It seemed to stem from the formless gray fog which strangely rippled around him. An enemy. Tail Devourer Ouroboros or the Aurora Order's Saint. Klein opened his eyes as he began considering countermeasures with an abnormally serious expression. Any mistake in a time such as this would require him to consider matters of being resurrected. As for Dark Will and Harry, there was absolutely no way for them to be spared. In the beginning, he hoped that the visitor could only vaguely sense a general area and might not find him or the die of probability. However, when he considered how he was on a ship with no one around on the sea, it wasn't too hard to lock onto a target. The problems would only become worse when that happened, with giving up being the only choice. Above the liner, space was suddenly torn open as an invisible door filled with complicated symbols appeared. 2 pale hands reached out from the door and suddenly pulled backwards, allowing his entire body to walk out. He wore a black bonnet and a classic dark robe, a favorite among elders. However, he didn't look past 40. His brown hair was slightly curled, which seemed abnormally hard. Countless illusory images darted across his dark eyes, as though layers after layer of chaotic worlds were hidden within. As Klein's sense of danger intensified, just the change in his expression frightened Dark Will and Harry enough for them to freeze. He didn't hesitate as he followed the plans he had made for such situations. He leaned forward and picked up the die of probability. Determine the outcome of the malefic visitor who just arrived. I want 1 point. Klein said in a deep and soft voice, and he threw out the milky white die. He subconsciously prayed to the goddess, hoping that the die which had recently been intimidated was obedient enough and played a meaningful role. Meanwhile, he appeared extremely calm, to prevent the die from sensing his anxiety and take the opportunity to cause trouble. As the die of probability rolled several times while producing clinking sounds, it fixed at the blood-red 1 point. Above the liner, the black-robed man, who didn't look 40, had the entire liner reflected within his eyes. He emanated his spirituality and scanned the surroundings. He extended his hand to grab the space in front of him as he suddenly pulled a nearly invisible door. The powerhouse stepped in and vanished from the spot. Inside the first-class cabin, Klein immediately felt the danger distancing itself from him. He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He looked at the die of probability on the coffee table and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. If this die didn't have such a negative side effect and could be utilized to its full extent, it would be a divine artifact. As expected of a grade 0 sealed artifact. As expected of the uniqueness of the monster pathway. Only at this point in time did Darkwill find his courage again as he carefully asked, what just happened? Klein maintained his posture and calmly replied, there's no need for you to know. I understand. The more I know, the greater the danger I'll be in. Darkwill wiped the cold sweat from his face. There weren't any more accidents in the next few hours. After the sun went below the horizon and the sky became completely dark, Klein finally saw a towering lighthouse appear not too far away. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.